Chapter 513. After hanging up the phone, Eric left the balcony and walked back to his office. Nicole, who had been sitting quietly on the sofa and reading a magazine, looked up curiously. This was Eric's personal office in Firefly Cineplex. Because he rarely worked here, the furnishings in the office were very simple. There was a set of office desks and chairs, a set of sofas, and a row of bookshelves with many documents on the opposite side of the desk. Seeing Eric sit down, Nicole poured a cup of coffee for Eric and placed it in front of him. She asked, "I think I heard TG's name. Did they call?" "It was Rupert Murdoch," Eric shook his head. In addition to confirming the sale of TG from Eric, Murdoch also hoped that after Fox completed the acquisition, Fox and Firefly's original rights in TG could be swapped. In other words, Fox would take back the North American distribution and peripheral development rights of TG's movies, and at the same time, give the overseas distribution rights to Firefly. Eric also knew what Murdoch was planning. Although he would give up 15% of TG's interests, he could keep the movie company in contact with him. This was undoubtedly the most beneficial plan for Fox. As long as Eric agreed to this condition, Fox was willing to pay $80 million to redeem TG's distribution rights in Firefly, and pay $120 million to the other three women for the acquisition of TG. Without Eric's interference, TG's most profitable movies were Jim Carrey's comedies. With the frequency of one movie a year in the next few years, Jim Carrey's box office appeal was at its peak after the accumulation of his previous movies. As long as he didn't dabble in the arts and didn't make any changes, it wouldn't be a problem for him to make a total of $300 million in profits from 3 movies. Fox's offer of $200 million in total was also reasonable. After all, the $80 million that Eric received to invest in the movies could multiply several times in 3 years. Hearing Murdoch's name, Nicole didn't ask any more questions. She took out a thick stack of scripts from her handbag and handed them to Eric. "Pete gave these to me yesterday. I think he wants you to take a look at them." Eric took the script and saw the eye-catching title, The Mummy, on the cover, as well as the logo of Universal Pictures. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Other than the script, did Worldwide pass me anything else?" Eric asked and let go of the script. Nicole shook her head. "No, but Pete did some research after receiving the script yesterday. This movie is a remake of an old Universal film from 1932. Michael Eisner personally made the decision to make it into a series of movies like Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. Universal sold the rights to the remake to an independent production company, and now they're trying to take it back. It seems that they're still in contact with Spielberg, hoping that he can take on the role of director. Pete said that the possibility of that happening is low, but Spielberg should be able to take on the role of producer. The producer in charge of this project also said yesterday that if I can sign on for another movie, they're willing to compromise on the pay. Many of the plots in Hollywood commercial films had already been finalized. Although the script in Eric's hands was a little different from what he remembered, the general concept of the plot and the setting of the characters were similar. After hurriedly flipping through the script, Eric looked up and asked, "What do you think?" Nicole put down the coffee cup in her hand and said seriously, "I used to play those noisy characters. I think the role of the knowledgeable librarian in this script is quite interesting." "In that case, take it." Eric put the script on the coffee table. After thinking for a while, he walked back to his desk. Nicole looked at Eric's back and said, "But this is a Universal movie." Michael Eisner." "Haha, I'm not that stingy. As long as you like it, it's fine. Besides, if you don't act in it, Universal will look for other actresses," Eric said as he took out a phone book from the drawer of his desk. He quickly found a number and picked up the landline on his desk to dial it. Nicole was a little puzzled by Eric's actions and didn't say anything to disturb him. Eric picked up the phone and waited for a while. The call went through and he said, "I'm Eric Williams. Please pick up Mr. Eisner." In an office at Universal's headquarters in Burbank, Eisner's assistant was very surprised when he heard Eric introduce himself. He even forgot to inform Eric in advance and directly transferred the call to Michael Eisner's landline. After the call went through, he realized something. He stood up and pushed open the door to Michael Eisner's office without knocking. He saw that Michael Eisner was already smiling and talking on the other end of the phone. When he saw the assistant suddenly barge in, he didn't get angry. He just waved his hand and gestured for the assistant to leave. "Eric, I didn't expect you to call. What's the matter?" Michael Eisner asked with a smile as he chased the assistant away. He leaned on the sofa and asked, "I just saw the script for The Mummy. It's a good idea." Eric's tone was also very casual. "However, I can see that Universal is planning to develop a series. I don't know if you have the complete script for the series. The outline is fine too. I want to take a look." Michael Eisner's fingers, which were rubbing on the table, paused for a moment. He quickly smiled and said, "Of course, no problem. I'll get someone to send it to you. By the way, where are you now?" "Pria Vesta," Eric replied. "Oh, the post-production of Jurassic Park should be completed soon, right? It's a pity that we didn't see the trailer of this movie at the Super Bowl." Eric replied without changing his tone. "We'll see it soon. I believe many people will be surprised." "Then I'll wait and see." Michael Eisner said with a smile, "Don't forget to send me an invitation during the test screening." "Okay, I'll find a reporter to take a photo of you participating in the test screening. This is a great opportunity to promote Jurassic Park," Eric said half-jokingly. Michael Eisner raised his eyebrows. If such a photo was released, the relationship between the two of them would definitely be thawed. "Haha, I'll cooperate with you. If there's nothing else, let's have a meal together when you're free?" "No problem." "Then, goodbye," Eric said. After hearing the other party's response, he hung up the phone. Michael Eisner heard the busy tone on the other side of the phone. He didn't put the phone back. Instead, he held the phone in his hand and gently tapped on the table. He frowned slightly as he thought about Eric's purpose for calling. Is he trying to confuse me with his importance to the script of The Mummy and make Worldwide invest more? After thinking about it, Michael Eisner felt that it was unlikely. The other party wouldn't play such a low-level trick. Then, what's the purpose of this call? Although he couldn't figure it out, Michael Eisner quickly ordered his assistant to send the series outline of The Mummy to Eric. He wasn't worried that Eric would plagiarize the script of The Mummy, or anything like that. If such a thing really happened, then Worldwide could happily fight a lawsuit against Firefly. While Eric was on the phone, the curious Nicole had already pulled a chair and sat across from Eric. After Eric hung up the phone, Nicole asked curiously, "Hey, why do you want the script of The Mummy?" "I'm very interested in the special effects of The Mummy. I want Digital Domain to take over the special effects of this movie." Eric didn't hide it, but he couldn't explain it to Nicole too clearly. Specifically, he was very interested in the special effects of the second film of the original, The Mummy. In the script just now, Eric had already seen clues about the reincarnation of the female lead, Evelyn, and information about the undead army of the ancient Egyptian god of death, Anubis. In the original, The Mummy 2, the undead army summoned by the Scorpion King left a deep impression on Eric. Due to the high cost of manpower in the West, it was basically impossible to achieve a war scene with thousands of soldiers and horses in real life within the budget of a movie in this era. The only way was to use computer-generated special effects. And if Worldwide's outline of the script was not too different from the original, taking over the special effects production of the sequel of The Mummy would be a very good opportunity for Digital Domain to develop large-scale war special effects. Although Eric had already signaled for the Digital Domain to start developing related technologies, no one knew what the specific effects would be without real movie works to train in practical application. They also didn't know which aspect to develop and improve the technology. Large-scale war special effects were a very important part of the development of future special effects movies. If Digital Domain grasped the opportunity in this area, they would be able to have a big lead in technology over other movie companies. Even if the series outline of The Mummy that Worldwide sent over later didn't have the undead army scene, Eric planned to develop a related special effects movie in the next 2 or 3 years for Digital Domain to practice. Nicole wasn't very interested in the topic of special effects. Her slender fingers flicked a few times on the script, and she looked at Eric and said, "If you really don't have any objections, I'll let Peter talk about the contract with Worldwide." Eric looked at the thick script under Nicole's arm and suddenly thought that since Michael Eisner sent the script to him through Nicole, The reason should not be just to let Nicole ask if he was willing to let her play the role. Thinking about the inside story of Joanna's sudden resignation half a year ago, Eric took the script again, pulled out a pencil from the pen holder next to him, tapped the table, and thought for a while. Finally, he wrote a number of 5% on the cover and handed the script to Nicole. Nicole tilted her head to look at the number and asked, "What's this?" "Your personal salary should be $10 million now. I owed Michael Eisner a favor last year, and now it's just the right time to pay him back. You can let Peter help you talk about a 5% share for all channels. Although giving up a fixed salary will make it take a lot longer for you to get back your salary, you'll definitely get more than $10 million. If you give up your salary and take a share, it'll indirectly increase Worldwide's confidence in this project." "Oh, you're using my contract to do a favor, and you don't even ask if he's willing to do it. Who knows if this movie can make $200 million? Nicole rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth were still curled up. Eric felt the girl's anger, and very considerately asked with a smile, "Are you willing to do it?" Nicole was not short of money at the moment. It was not a bad choice to get more money and let Eric remember her. She pretended to think for a moment, and said, reluctantly, "Okay, I'll do it. But, with the matter of Jack Nicholson before, do you think Worldwide will agree so easily?" Jack Nicholson's salary in Batman was a hot topic for many stars in the entertainment industry. Many people dreamed of having such a chance to make a fortune. Eric said, "If Worldwide doesn't agree, then you can just take $10 million directly. It's not a loss for you." Nicole nodded thoughtfully, reached out and grabbed the pencil from Eric's hand, and directly added a number in front of the 5% figure on the cover to make it 15%. Then she said to Eric, "Then I'll let Peter start with 15%. Maybe in the end, it'll be more than 10%. Although this movie is a big investment, even including the distribution fee, the total investment will not exceed $100 million. If I only take 5% of my $10 million, it'll be a loss." Computer-generated special effects movies had just become popular in the North American and global markets for a few years, and it was a time when the market was booming. The script of The Mummy was also very good. As long as the main creators did not mess around and maintain the standard of the original version in Eric's memory, it would not be a problem for the movie to earn more than $300 million at the box office worldwide. Based on a rough estimate, the investment was $60 million, the publicity was $20 million, and Worldwide would be able to recoup all the costs by relying on the box office. The subsequent videotapes and related products would be even more profitable. Within the 2-year distribution cycle, it would not be a problem for the movie to earn more than $200 million. If Nicole could really negotiate for more than 10% of all the channels, she might become the first female star to step into the $20 million club. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but give Nicole a thumbs up and said with a smile, "You're ruthless. Women are the most vicious." "Bah, don't say that about me." Nicole lightly slapped Eric's hand and put the script in her bag. Then she asked with a smile, "It's almost noon. Let's go to Venice Beach for lunch, shall we? There are a few good restaurants there." "Won't we be surrounded?" Eric asked with a smile. Mr. and Mrs. Smith was still showing sporadically, and some overseas markets were in full swing. Nicole's fame was at its peak, and now her every move was being closely watched by the paparazzi. Although the possibility of the paparazzi sneaking into the studio was not high, as long as the two of them went out, they would definitely be surrounded. "I'll ask my assistant to drive the car away first, and you can find an ordinary car. We can sneak out. Even if we are discovered, I don't have a boyfriend, and you don't have a formal girlfriend. What can they say?" As Nicole spoke, her eyes became resentful. "Or are you saying that you don't want to show up with me?" "Stop, your eyes are too lethal. I surrender." "Ha ha." Chapter 5:14. Although they were very careful and even borrowed an ordinary car from an employee of Digital Domain, there were many filming crews at Firefly Studios at any time. Of course, Nicole was not the only celebrity there. In the end, Eric and Nicole could not escape the paparazzi's pursuit. The bodyguard drove the car and parked outside an Italian seafood restaurant in Venice Beach a few kilometers away. As soon as Eric and Nicole got out of the car, 5 or 6 paparazzi immediately jumped out of the car that was tailing them. They excitedly pressed the shutters on Eric and Nicole's faces. Eric saw the other 3 bodyguards get out of another car and quickly move forward to block the paparazzi. He immediately realized where the problem was. The tall and strong bodyguard sitting in the driver's seat just now was too obvious. The paparazzi with a keen sense of smell outside the studio saw that the driver of the inconspicuous car was actually such a professional security guard who could be recognized at a glance. Of course, he could tell that the person sitting in the back must be someone important, so it was not surprising that he followed. Nicole skillfully put on her sunglasses to block the flashing spotlights around her. Then, she smiled at Eric apologetically. She knew that Eric did not like to appear in gossip magazines. If she had not insisted, this would not have happened. "Let's go." Eric also put on his sunglasses. He stepped forward and put his arm around Nicole's shoulder. The two quickly walked to the restaurant. When the paparazzi saw Eric's actions, they became even more excited. They took pictures and asked loudly without any scruples. "Eric, are you and Nicole dating? Will Nicole be the female lead in your next movie? Do you have plans to get married?" Eric and Nicole walked into the restaurant without saying a word. The paparazzi were blocked by the restaurant's security guards. Eric vaguely heard a paparazzi's indignant argument. "Eric, I'm so sorry," Nicole whispered after entering the door. Eric let go of Nicole's shoulder and said with a smile, "You know, I'm the kind of guy who doesn't care about debts. As long as you don't mind." Nicole smiled and shook her head. "Of course I don't mind." A blonde waitress with a few cute freckles on the tip of her nose led the two of them to a seat with a wide view of the sea. Then, she handed the menu to Eric and Nicole excitedly, but her eyes were fixed on Eric. "Mr. Williams, Miss Kidman, welcome. What would you like to eat? What delicious food do you have here?" Eric asked casually. The waitress stared at the side of Eric's face and recommended, "Our pan-fried sea bass is not bad. We just had sea bass flown in from Peru this morning. We also have cheese butter baked prawns and seafood pasta." Eric flipped open the menu and glanced at it before closing it. He raised his head and asked, "Where's the wine? Our white wine here is pretty good. It's Verona's specialty, Suvil dry white wine. It's best to eat seafood with white wine." The waitress did not avoid Eric's gaze when she saw him raise his head. Instead, she boldly looked into his eyes and said with a smile, "Then we'll order a bottle of dry white wine." Eric did not know where Verona was and guessed that it was a place in Italy. After saying this, he looked at Nicole, who was seriously flipping through the menu. "Nicole, what would you like to eat?" It took them a while to finish ordering. After the waitress walked away, Eric showed a lingering fear expression. "I was really worried that the girl would suddenly say that our deep-fried Williams here is not bad." "Ha, don't talk nonsense. Maybe she's your fan," Nicole said with a smile. As they were talking, the spotlights on the beach not far from the floor-to-ceiling window lit up again. The beach was a public place. Neither Eric's bodyguards nor the restaurant's security guards could chase them away. Eric looked at the paparazzi holding the telephoto camera helplessly and said, "It's award season now. What's the use of following us? We have no nominations." Nicole motioned to the restaurant's waiter to draw the curtains of the floor-to-ceiling window next to her to block the distant view. Then she said, "I've seen some articles mentioning you in the newspapers these days." The tone was sour. "But, do you really not have any intention of shooting an Olympic film?" "Not yet." "You know Woody Allen, right?" Nicole smiled and said, "How could I not know? It was so big last year." Eric did not talk to Nicole about Woody Allen's trivial matters. Instead, he said, "Then you should also know that he never attends the Oscars. Even when he won the Best Director award for and Hall, he did not attend." "I agree with his attitude towards the Oscars. He said that if a director shoots his own work to win a film award, then he will subconsciously be bound by the rules and give up what he wants to express. Woody Allen is one of the few film directors who can be very popular in several major film festivals in North America and Europe. I think this should have a lot to do with him not being bound by the rules and focusing on his own work. He's a very interesting director," Nicole commented after listening to Eric's words. Speaking of which, although Woody Allen is in a slump right now, I'm sure he'll make a comeback in a few years. He'll always be able to portray the female lead in his films beautifully. Are you interested in working with him? No, I want to focus on shooting commercial films now. When I earn enough money that I can't spend it all in my lifetime, then I'll do something I want to do, like winning an Oscar for Best Actress or something. Once I'm successful, I'll have 2 or 3 children and focus on being a good mother. When that time comes, a lot of people will definitely say, "Wow, Nicole Kidman is a has-been. She can only muddle along in some small artistic films," Eric said with a smile. But thinking back carefully, although several generations of famous Hollywood actresses were very keen to participate in Woody Allen's films for more than 40 years since the 1970s, Nicole had never worked with Woody Allen. The only time she publicly announced her intention to work with Woody Allen was Encounter with a Stranger. The news was only revealed for a month before Nicole quickly expressed her resignation. In the end, the female lead of that film became Nicole's best friend, Naomi Watts. They can say whatever they want. What about you? Jurassic Park should be finished soon, right? But I haven't heard any plans for your next film. There's no plan. Eric shook his head honestly. If Jurassic Park achieves expectations, it'll be considered a phase of completion. I'll have to take a break. Eric's box office expectations for Jurassic Park were only known to a few people, such as Stan Winston, Roland Emmerich, and Cameron. These people did not disclose the information, so of course, Nicole would not know. I don't quite understand. What's the first phase? It's the first phase where I'll be personally involved. In the future, I'll put more effort into producing films. For example, I don't plan to personally direct the sequel to Jurassic Park anymore. I also plan to find other directors for the original disaster films. These films often have to be shot all over the world. I can't always leave Los Angeles for a few months every year. Of course, I'll still personally direct the films, but it depends on the specific situation. Nicole nodded and suddenly thought of something. Just as she was about to speak, the waiter served the dishes they ordered. Nicole's lips curled up as she watched the waitress serve Eric his food. She then eagerly asked Eric if he needed anything else. After the waitress left, she continued, "I almost forgot something. You were the one who made the movie Interview with the Vampire at Night, weren't you?" "Yeah, why?" Eric asked as he picked up the cutlery and fiddled with the bass in front of him. Nicole said, "Have the roles been decided?" Night Interview with the Vampire is a collaboration between Firefly and David Geffen's production company. David Geffen has taken over the position of producer, and he's mainly in charge of this matter. Firefly is only checking on the script and budget for the time being. At present, the several main creators of the movie have not submitted the list of candidates for the cast. As Eric spoke, he thought of the 2 male leads in the original version of Interview with the Vampire. He looked at Nicole and asked, "Did someone come to you, Tom Cruise?" "Nope. Tom Cruise is such an arrogant person. Why would he come to me to beg?" Paula did talk to Peter about this matter. She hoped that Cruise could get the role, but Peter didn't ask us to help communicate this matter. Although Cruise's previous works weren't very good, he's still an A-list actor. Also, I heard that David Geffen is also interested in letting him play the male lead. When Nicole said the last sentence, she winked at Eric with a mischievous smile. "Your thoughts are too evil," Eric said softly with a smile. Everyone knew that David Geffen was known as the most powerful homosexual in Hollywood, and Cruise's sexual orientation was 10 times more hidden than Hollywood's #1 closet actor, Kevin Spacey. "Then, if it's not Tom Cruise, why are you bringing this up?" "It's an artist that Peter just signed. He's got good potential. Of course, we won't ask for the male lead. Peter wants him to try for the role of the second male lead." Eric joked, "Men who play vampires have to be very handsome." "You're actually speaking for such a person." Nicole smiled and waved her hand. "You're also very handsome. He's my fellow countryman from Australia. Of course, I have to help him." "Fellow countryman from Australia? I can't agree to this even more." Eric narrowed his eyes and dragged his voice. Nicole laughed a few more times and picked up a red cherry from her plate to put on Eric's plate. She said as if she was comforting a child, "Okay, I'll give you a cherry. I'll take it that you've agreed. When I go back, I'll get Peter to call David Geffen and tell him that you've agreed." Eric picked the cherry into his mouth and said, "Okay, you can arrange it as long as he can pass the audition. If he's not suitable, I'll definitely not agree." "Of course." Nicole nodded. Eric looked at the almost finished lunch and said, "What are you going to do in the afternoon?" "I just finished promoting Mr. and Mrs. Smith in Europe a few days ago. I've been taking a break recently. I'll stay in the studio to accompany you in the afternoon. Is that okay?" "No problem. I'm just about to edit a sample of Jurassic Park." "You can help me. Then I'll learn a little. Maybe I can change my career to become a director in the future." Eric called the waiter over and handed him his credit card. Then he said to Nicole, "Just be a good actress. Not everyone can be a director. It's not good to be greedy." "Then why do you seem like you know everything?" Nicole asked curiously as she held her chin with one hand. Of course, Eric couldn't tell the girl that he had studied directing for 4 years in his previous life. After graduation, he had been in the industry for nearly 20 years. Although he hadn't been able to shoot his own movie, after 20 years of accumulation, his basic skills were definitely very solid. At this time, facing Nicole's curious eyes, Eric raised his chin and said shamelessly, "I'm a genius. How can you small fries compare to me?" "Haha, you're so arrogant." Nicole laughed and threw a piece of tissue at him. The next day, of course, the tabloids were bustling with activity again. However, although Eric and Nicole were caught red-handed, neither of them made any response. They completely ignored the media's comments as long as the other party didn't cross the line. The production of Jurassic Park entered the final stage. Eric spent a long time every day in the post-production center of the studio. Nicole spent the next few days with Eric in the name of resting. When Eric was working, she was his temporary assistant. After work, the two of them went back to the Sharp Corner Manor together. In order to avoid trouble, Eric took a helicopter to and from work every day. The paparazzi gathered outside the Firefly Cineplex were hoping to get more explosive news, but after seeing the Black Bell 230 take off and land in the studio for a few days, they could only curse helplessly and slowly disperse. During the day, he had a woman to accompany him at night. Although he had to work overtime for a few hours every day for the post-production of Jurassic Park, Eric's days were still very comfortable. Occasionally, he would think that he had forgotten something, but he would quickly shake it off without a trace. Eric felt that if he forgot something, Alan, who was in charge of his schedule, would definitely remind him in time, so he didn't worry too much about it. After more than a week, Eric received a call from Kapoor again. Listening to Kapoor's complaints, Eric suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to meet with Charlize Theron. Chapter 5:15. After the Buffy audition, there was no news. According to the arrangement of her agent, Charlize Theron stayed in a motel in West Hollywood. Although the accommodation was not expensive, only $10 a day was enough to support her. From January until now, she had spent all her savings to prepare for the Buffy audition. If not for her agent, Michelle Simmons, hinting that there was an opportunity waiting for her that many actors might not encounter in their lifetime, she would have bought a plane ticket and flown back to New York. Even for the past few days, she had spent the $500 that Michelle Simmons had lent her. She waited for more than a week. Because of Michelle Simmons's repeated reminders, she almost never left the 2-kilometer radius of the motel. Fortunately, from the motel, about a kilometer to the north was the famous Walk of Fame. She would occasionally walk there, and like many pedestrians, she would bow her head and admire the stars inlaid on the road. Many people were curious or worshipping, but she often swore to herself that one day she would leave her own star here. Eric Williams said that he wanted to see her. This was her biggest opportunity. During the Buffy audition, because the guy suddenly laughed and interrupted her performance, she hated him for a while. Then this hatred was severely extinguished by her agent. She used to only know that he was a big shot in Hollywood. In recent years, he was the hottest director and producer in Hollywood, and the boss of Firefly Films. Oh, he also had a very grand villa in Malibu. Because it looked like a shell, many people called it the Shell Villa. Some people called it the Freedom City. But after a few days of in-depth understanding, she knew what Eric Williams meant in Hollywood. Now, in her hotel room, there was still the Premiere magazine that had been flipped through many times. He was the most powerful person in Hollywood in 1992. He was the big boss of Firefly Pictures, which had swallowed Disney. His personal wealth had exceeded $5 billion, and the movies he had shot in just 5 years had grossed more than $2 billion at the global box office. More importantly, he had personally made Julia Roberts, Nicolas Cage, Bridget Fonda, Nicole Kidman, Pierce Brosnan, and a large group of Hollywood actors who were originally unknown, popular. Then, he said that he would find time to meet her. Although she didn't know how her agent got her this opportunity, after understanding these things, Charlize Theron was so excited that she couldn't sleep well for several days. Whether it was day or night, she couldn't help but think about what to say and do during the meeting to attract his attention. Just like that, 1 day passed, 2 days passed, a week passed, and soon it would be 10 days. In the past few days, she even began to worry that Eric Williams had forgotten about it. She was worried about her gains and losses. She summoned the courage to take the initiative to call her agent for the first time. The reply, she was to be patient, but she was still keenly aware of the uncertainty in her agent's voice. She was to be patient, wait. The owner of the motel was a white fat man with a good heart. Seeing that a little girl like her had been idling in his shop for so many days, doing nothing but being careful with her spending, he kindly offered to introduce her to a job. Although she was very tempted, she still had to reject the other party. And it was impossible for a girl like her, who had won a modeling competition, not to attract the attention of others. A group of young men and women wandering in Hollywood invited her to some messy parties. Of course, she didn't dare to go. So when she met them these days, she always heard some strange words from the mouths of those people, and some of the men's eyes didn't hide their bad intentions. In the end, because of some small friction, she couldn't hold back and showed her shrewish nature. She had a big quarrel with the other party. Fortunately, the motel owner intervened, and they didn't fight. After the argument, she felt a lingering fear. If they had really fought, her body, especially her face, would have been injured. Then, her chance would have been completely ruined. So she was even more anxious and depressed for the rest of the day. She closed the curtains and lay on the hard little bed in the dark room for an entire day. She even used lip gloss to fiercely draw on the face of the guy on the cover of Premiere magazine as if to vent her anger. She was too lazy to eat dinner. She planned to starve a page and save a few dollars. When the sky was getting dark, someone suddenly knocked on the door of the motel room. This had never happened before. She asked vigilantly, and the voice of her agent came from outside the door. She had some premonition in her heart. She jumped out of bed in a panic and ran barefoot to open the door. Charlie! Michelle Simmons' face was obviously filled with joy, but she had just called her name. She looked up and down at her appearance under the dim orange light in the corridor. She immediately frowned and scolded, "Look at you now." She touched the switch to turn on the light and let her agent in with a guilty conscience. Only then did Charles Theron explain, "Sorry, Michelle, I was just sleeping." Michelle Simmons looked around the room and saw the Premiere magazine on the edge of the bed. The cover was scribbled messily. However, she didn't say anything this time. She just frowned and sighed. "Charlie, pack up your things. We're leaving now." Charles Theron pulled down the shoulder straps of her light blue pajamas and subconsciously touched her messy hair. Her feet rubbed against each other on the cold floor a few times. She said nervously, Now, are we going to see him?" Michelle Simmons didn't answer. She sniffed and asked, "Have you not showered for a few days?" Looking at her awkward expression, Michelle Simmons could only say, "Forget it. Pack your things quickly. Come to my place tonight. The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." After packing her simple luggage and paying the bill, Charles Theron got into a white car driven by her agent. After driving through the streets of Los Angeles for a while, they entered a densely packed residential area at the foot of Beverly Hills. Michelle Simmons quickly drove the car into the courtyard of a mansion. The two of them got out of the car. Charles Theron saw a tall bald man walk out of the living room with a smile on his face. "Kapoor, good evening." Michelle Simmons smiled and went forward. "Good evening, Michelle. You're here so soon." The bald man hugged Michelle Simmons before looking at Charles Theron, who was standing beside Michelle with a small suitcase. When their eyes met, Charles Theron smiled at the bald man, who nodded back at her. However, he quickly turned to Michelle Simmons and said, "I'm really sorry, Michelle. I called in the afternoon. It turns out that Eric really forgot. The post-production of Jurassic Park has entered the final stage. He has been working at least 12 hours a day these days. I hope you can understand. He even asked me to apologize to you in the afternoon." "It's okay. As long as Mr. Williams can spare the time, it's fine." Michelle Simmons shook her head and said without minding. When Charles Theron, who was standing behind Michelle, heard the bald man's words, she curled her lips in disdain. She remembered that she saw in the newspaper a few days ago that this guy and Nicole Kidman were leisurely having lunch together. The two of them looked so intimate in the photo. They didn't look busy at all. After Kapoor explained to Michelle Simmons, he turned to Charles Theron and said, "You must be Miss Theron." "I'm Kapoor Sid. I've seen your information." Charlize Theron then remembered that the other party was one of the big bosses of ICM. She quickly let go of the lever in her hand and stepped forward to shake the other party's hand. "Hello, Mr. Sid. Just call me Charlie." Kapoor nodded and let go of Char's hand. He took a step back and sized her up. He nodded lightly and said, "You should smile more. You'll be more charming when you smile." Charles Theron was a little surprised. A few years ago, when she participated in a modeling competition, a judge with a high reputation in the fashion industry had said something similar to her. Many female celebrities were more charming when they restrained their expressions. Once they smiled, they would lose their temperament. However, she was the opposite. When she was expressionless, she didn't even look beautiful. However, when she smiled, she immediately radiated charm. Charles didn't expect the middle-aged man in front of her to be able to notice this on their first meeting. "I will, Mr. Sid," Charles Theron nodded and said. The three of them entered the living room together. Kapoor asked the two of them to sit down and personally serve them coffee. He then said, "You can stay here temporarily until the matter is settled." "Thank you, Kapoor." Michelle Simmons nodded. Then she raised her voice slightly and said with a hint of something else, "When I leave, I'll personally return the key to Mary." "Heh, it's been so long and you still want to tease me with this matter?" Kapoor shook his head helplessly. He took out a document from a briefcase on the sofa and placed it on the coffee table. "Also, this is what you wanted. Take a look at it yourself. Try not to spread it. You know, even though this kind of thing is very common in the industry, it's not good for the person involved to know about it." "I understand," Michelle Simmons nodded and said, "What else?" Kapoor took out a business card and said, "This is the contact number of Eric's assistant. You can go to Firefly Studios in Praia Vista tomorrow at noon and contact him. Even though the meeting time is 12, it's best to go there early." Michelle nodded again. After telling them that, Kapoor thought for a moment and said, "The last time I called Eric, he said that he had thought of a good idea. I think it's an action movie with a female as the main character." After the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, everyone saw the potential of a female action movie. ICM has also been in contact with many similar projects recently, but none of them were major projects from major studios. They were only low-budget attempts by independent studios. Since Eric wants to do this kind of theme, it definitely won't be a small one. Kapoor glanced at Charles Theron, who was holding a cup of coffee awkwardly, and said, "I saw in the information that you changed your career because of a knee injury, Charlie. Can you still perform more intense combat actions?" "Of course, Mr. Sid. I only considered changing my job because of that injury. However, that accident didn't leave any sequelae. That's for the best." Kapoor nodded and chatted with Michelle Simmons for a while. He finished his cup of coffee and got up to leave. In the blink of an eye, only the two of them were left in the villa. Charles recalled Kapoor's words and felt a little excited. Then, she glanced at Michelle beside her and saw that she had picked up the document Kapoor left behind and was reading it. Charles straightened her back and her eyes quickly fell on the document. However, just as she noticed the two striking words Eric Williams on the paper, she heard Michelle say, "This isn't something you should be reading. Go take a shower first. There's a bathroom upstairs. We'll talk later." Charles, who was caught red-handed, felt her cheeks heat up. She quickly got up and slipped down the stairs with her small suitcase. After taking a shower, the two of them chatted about some matters. In order to prevent himself from appearing dispirited the next day, Charlize Theron forced himself to sleep, although he still couldn't remember having some messy dreams. Early the next morning, she was woken up by Michelle Simmons. The two of them had breakfast in a restaurant. Then, Michelle brought Charles to a famous shopping street in Beverly Hills. Charles Theron looked at the familiar luxury brands on both sides of the street and looked at her agent with some apprehension. Michelle Simmons, who always had a serious expression, made a rare joke. "You have to have a good outfit. Today's outfit is my investment in you. If you become an A-list celebrity, don't kick me out." "How is that possible?" "I won't." Charles Theron quickly shook her head and said. Michelle Simmons nodded slightly. She knew the character of the girl she had signed half a year ago very well. Charlize Theron was a woman with a strong personality, but she was also very realistic. If there was a better opportunity, she was sure that Charlize Theron would abandon her without hesitation. However, Michelle Simmons also believed that she could hold on to Charles Theron tightly. Chapter 5:16. After spending more than an hour in a beauty shop, Charlize Theron finished her hair, put on the windbreaker she had chosen not long ago, and came to a full-length mirror. The girl in the mirror was wearing light makeup. Her originally light-colored long hair was dyed golden brown. The khaki windbreaker, black slim pants, and black knee-high boots made her body look even more slender. A beautician who had just served Charlize Theron looked at the girl in the mirror with some envy and complimented, "This lady is really beautiful, but I notice that you don't seem to be wearing perfume. Maybe you can try the Miss Dior series of light perfume. It's fresh, elegant, and very suitable for your current temperament." Charlize Theron glanced at her agent standing next to her with a questioning look in her eyes. In the beginning, when she saw her agent casually spend a few $1,000s on a windbreaker, Charlize Theron was a little worried about how long it would take for her to pay back the money if she failed this time. Then, she gradually became numb to the expense after spending it again and again. Since she had already come to this point, she might as well go all out. Adding a bottle of perfume was nothing. Anyway, if she failed, she would definitely not be able to pay back the money. Michelle Simmons looked at Charlize Theron with satisfaction and nodded gently. When she heard the beautician's words, her face showed a moment of hesitation. Finally, she shook her head and said, "This is good. There's no need for perfume." Although Charlize Theron was a little puzzled, she didn't refute. From yesterday until now, from her manager's constant reminders of all kinds of things to take note of during the meeting, as well as her attire that made her look completely different from before, she could roughly guess the contents of the document with Eric Williams' name written on it last night. It must be that guy who did not like women wearing perfume. With that in mind, the two did not do anything else after paying the bill. They got into the car and drove straight to the Praia Vista community in the south of Culver City. It was only 10:30 when they arrived at Firefly Cineplex. Michelle parked the car in a parking lot outside the Cineplex. The two got out of the car and Charlize Theron couldn't help but look at the walls of Firefly Cineplex. Although there was a 2-meter-high wall blocking the view, the huge studio in the Cineplex still revealed its huge body. Michelle Simmons looked at her watch, but she didn't cross the road with Charles Theron to the cinema. Instead, she found a coffee shop nearby. After ordering 2 cups of coffee and a stack of snacks, Michelle Simmons said, "Charlie, do you remember what I told you?" Charlize Theron recalled what Michelle Simmons had told him last night, and then slowly repeated it to his agent. Michelle Simmons waited for her to finish before nodding. "Very good, but there's one more thing." I know you're a smart girl, but in front of Mr. Williams, don't show your cleverness. Just be natural. If you really feel nervous, then you'd rather speak less than speak incoherently. Charlize Theron recalled the lazy face in the audition room more than a week ago. He felt that his agent was being too serious, but he still nodded obediently. Do you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill? Michelle Simmons looked at Charlize Theron's expression and suddenly asked. Charlize Theron shook his head in a panic. No. Don't think that it's a small matter. He became famous with a few movies at the age of 18. He has great power in Hollywood at such a young age, and he's also a director. No matter which one it is, it will make his character seem a little childish. Michelle Simmons paused. She didn't use the word childish and hesitated for a moment before saying, a little emotional. Perhaps it's just a little careless mistake that will make him feel that he doesn't like you, and just this little bit of dislike might cause you to lose your chance. It's not like this hasn't happened before. Rumor has it that during the audition for the female lead of The X-Files, 2 producers had their eyes on an actress, but he only gave a baffling, I don't like this woman, and rejected her. Charlize Theron opened her mouth and listened to the industry gossip that Michelle Simmons casually revealed in surprise. She thought of the TV series The X-Files that she had also watched before and asked curiously in a low voice, Michelle, I heard that the female lead of The X-Files is also his lover. Is that true? Michelle Simmons glared at her and said, That's not something you should be concerned about. Charlize Theron brushed the hair in front of her forehead. She was quite confident in her appearance. Looking at her agent's expression, she became worried again. Then, if he wants me to do it to be his, what should I do? If that's the case, you'll immediately become the object of envy of 99% of the female stars in Hollywood. You'll also have everything that ordinary people can't touch in a short period of time. You'll have the best material life, a dazzling career as a star, a high salary, and the best treatment. You won't have to submit to the rules of Hollywood, and you won't have to work so hard to maintain your status like other stars. As Michelle Simmons spoke, she saw the unconcealable yearning in the eyes of the girl opposite her, so she unceremoniously poured cold water on her. But you can rest assured that he probably doesn't have a crush on you. Charlize Theron couldn't help but let out an ah and asked somewhat unwillingly, Why? Michelle Simmons shrugged and said, Who knows why? It's just like how we still haven't figured out why he suddenly laughed during the audition for Buffy. But with his personality, if he had a crush on you, he would have taken action when you attended the audition for Buffy. But the fact is, not only did that not happen, he even forgot to meet you. So, girl, the most important thing for you this time is to seize the opportunity that Kapoor mentioned. Don't think about anything else. Charlize Theron's shoulders slumped slightly, and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face. Michelle Simmons took a sip of coffee and quickly said, But you haven't forgotten what I told you on the phone that night, right? If he sends you an invitation in that way, remember, don't refuse. It's definitely good for you. There are countless female stars in Hollywood who want to climb into his bed, and he's not one of those old and ugly men. You won't lose out. Charlize Theron rolled her eyes slightly, but she didn't refute and nodded. The two of them spent time in a roadside coffee shop until 11:30. Michelle Simmons picked up her mobile phone and dialed the number of Eric's assistant. After talking for a while, she took Charlize Theron to Firefly Studios. The guards at the studio had also been instructed in advance. After confirming their identities, they handed 2 temporary passes to the two of them before letting them in. The main road of the park was very spacious, and there were many trucks, electric scooters, and exquisite nanny vans parked close to the studios on both sides. Near noon, many people came in and out of the open studio doors. Occasionally, a group of people could be seen escorting celebrities out of the studio and into the nanny vans. After walking for a few hundred meters, they passed through the studio area. Across a small square, a row of commercial lofts with steel frames and glass as the main body appeared in their field of vision. They continued walking until they finally arrived at the administrative area of the studio. Michelle Simmons made another call, and soon, a young man in his 30s came out of an office building. After a few words of introduction, he said, Mr. Williams is already in the restaurant. Follow me. In addition to the large staff cafeteria, there were several relatively high-end specialty restaurants in the studio. After the scandal a week ago, Eric and Nicole did not go out to eat when they were in the studio. Instead, they chose one of the restaurants. After work in the morning, Eric looked at the time and took Nicole to the place where they often had lunch in advance. Eric was not in a hurry to order. Instead, he called Alan and began to draw on the sketchpad he brought from the office. Looking at Eric, who was quickly drawing on the sketchpad beside her, Nicole could not help but ask, "Do you really not need me to leave for a while?" Eric looked up at Nicole and smiled. "No, I asked Alan to bring the girl and her agent here. We just want to meet, have a meal together, and have a casual chat." At this time, Nicole also knew the ins and outs of the matter. She nodded and looked at the sketchpad in Eric's hand. In the background that looked like a flame, there were three valiant figures standing. "What is this? The concept art of the Thunderbolt girls in your plan?" Eric nodded. When he saw Nicole's face coming closer, he moved the sketchpad towards her and continued to add lines with a pencil in his hand. He explained, "Yes, I plan to completely adapt the Charlie's Angels TV series. If it's feasible, I want to make it into a female secret agent series like 007. Eric was not very fond of the original Thunderbolt Girls series. Not only was the original plot scattered, but there were also too many traces of music video. It was said that the director at that time, Joseph Mike Nitcher, was originally a music video director. However, he did not change his career path like David Vinci and Michael Bay did. Therefore, there were a lot of scenes similar to music video in Thunderbolt Girls. If it were not for the original's real-life special effects and a series of gimmicks such as female action movies, the movie's box office success was not high. Therefore, the series came to an abrupt end after listing 2 movies and could not be restarted for a long time. The subsequent TV series remake also ended in failure. Now that the control of the series was in his hands, Eric was not only not going to follow the original style, but also had a bigger ambition. That was to make this story into a longer series of action movies. Even if it could not catch up with the classic 007 series, he would work hard in this direction. 007 has already filmed 16 movies. It's not that easy to develop a similar series of movies. Frank Marcheso, who has just taken over MGM, recently plans to restart 007's 17th movie. They have already sent me an invitation to ask if I have the intention to play the role of Bond girl. Nicole's casual words gave Eric an idea. He turned his head and looked at the girl from head to toe. Nicole was confused and shrank her neck back. She laughed and said, "Haha, haven't you seen it? I thought you were starting to get tired of it." Eric stuck his head out and kissed the girl's lips. He said with a smile, "How is that possible? I just suddenly thought of a good idea." "Oh," Eric said, "since 007 has a Bond girl, then there should also be a more typical villain in Thunderbolt. Let's call her Fallen Angel." "Fallen Angel? Don't tell me you want me to play it?" "Bingo, the first Fallen Angel. What do you think?" "Nothing much. Since you want to develop a new series, the 3 female leads you chose shouldn't be too famous. If I'm the villain, even if I have to face 3 girls, I'll be able to suppress them in all aspects. When the time comes, the audience will focus on me, and the movie will definitely lose its balance," Nicole said confidently. Eric also quickly realized this problem. The recent Mr. and Mrs. Smith had successfully created a strong queen's aura for Nicole. According to his plan, the 3 new actresses would definitely be difficult to suppress. Since the first movie is not good, then the second one will be good. It just so happens that we can use the first movie to make the series famous, and then use the second to strengthen the reputation of Fallen Angel. The subsequent series development will be smoother. "That's more like it. I can give it a try when the time comes." Nicole nodded. Just as they were chatting, Alan led Charlize Theron and Michelle Simmons into the restaurant. Nicole's gaze paused for a moment on Michelle Simmons, who was wearing a black suit and had short hair. Then, she moved to Charlize Theron and sized him up. Suddenly, she smiled and whispered into Eric's ear, "Your food." I haven't ordered my food yet, Eric replied softly and stood up. Hello, Mr. Williams. I'm Michelle Simmons. Nice to meet you. Michelle Simmons walked over and extended her hand to Eric enthusiastically. Then, she greeted Nicole and quickly gave her seat to Charlize Theron. Miss Theron, we meet again. This time, it was Eric who took the initiative to greet her. He also sized up the lucky person in front of him in the original spacetime, who was on the assembly line of the Hollywood movie industry. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile users, please read it at M. Chapter 517. Charlize Theron's rise to fame in the original spacetime was very typical. The South African girl, who had no roots and no foundation, went to the City of Angels like many young men and women with dreams of being a star. After spending 2 years in Hollywood, she attracted the attention of the circle with a thriller film, 2 Days in the Valley, which was a parody of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. With her acting skills and appearance recognized, she began to play the role of a vase in various types of films. After a few years of hard work, she became a quasi-A-list actress. Later, she relied on her large-scale self-destructive performance in She-Devil to win the Best Actress Oscar and successfully became an A-list actress. Then, she began to receive invitations to be the female lead in commercial blockbusters such as Hancock, Snow White and The Huntsman from mainstream film studios. Of course, luck played a big part in the whole process. The reason why Charlize Theron could become an A-list actress in Hollywood and obtain the title of South Africa's Beautiful Diamond was not only because of her acting skills and appearance, but also because she never took the wrong path. Eric remembered that in the original spacetime, Charlize Theron had participated in the audition for the female lead in Paul Van Hoven's No Beautiful Women, which was criticized by many. Fortunately, she failed in the end. Elizabeth Berkley, who got the role, had a good career in Hollywood. However, after the movie was released, due to the bad reviews of the movie, not only was her acting career ruined, even her agent had abandoned her. After the few of them introduced themselves and sat down at the table, Michelle Simmons relaxed. At the same time, she had to be alert. She originally thought that Eric planned to have lunch with Charlize Theron alone, so she put all her attention on Charlize and did not prepare much for this meeting. She did not expect that Eric's assistant would suddenly say that Eric had asked her and Charlize to come together. She also did not expect that Nicole Kidman would be sitting next to Eric. The waiter handed over the menu, but Eric just put it aside. He ignored the reserved Charlize Theron and took the initiative to ask Michelle Simmons, "Michelle, are you good friends with Kapoor?" "Yes, Mr. Williams. Kapoor, his wife, Mary, and I were classmates in college. We have known each other for almost 20 years. No wonder," Eric said with a smile. He sized up the short-haired woman in a suit and did not continue to inquire about her relationship with Kapoor. "Kapoor said that you had always been in the television business. Why did you suddenly change to a movie agent?" "I feel that my personal development in the television industry has reached a bottleneck, so I want to try my hand in the film industry," Michelle Simmons replied. Nicole had ordered lunch for Eric and herself. She took the menu and whispered to Eric, "Eric, do you think these are okay?" When Michelle Simmons saw Eric approach Nicole intimately, she quickly took the opportunity to order her lunch from the waiter. Charlize Theron, who was sitting beside her, also ordered the same dishes as her agent. Looking at the two of them discussing in low voices, Eric said something, and Nicole even let out a soft chuckle. Charlize Theron smacked Eric, feeling a faint sense of envy and unwillingness to be ignored. However, he didn't dare to express anything out of the ordinary. "All right, that's all. I still have work in the afternoon, so I don't want any alcohol. Juice will do." Eric said one last sentence before he turned his gaze to Michelle Simmons again. "You should have a lot of TV series actors in your hands, right?" Michelle Simmons replied, "Yes. The actor of Walter Narkins in The X-Files, Mitt Pegg, is my client. I also have 7 other clients, all of whom play important roles in different TV series." Walter Narkins's identity in The X-Files was the assistant to the director of the Bureau of Investigation. He had once gone through life and death with the 2 leads. Although this character only appeared in the second season of The X-Files, he was a major supporting role that was second only to the two leads in the planned number of episodes. The fact that he only appeared in the second season was also a very important factor. It was often more difficult to get such an important role in a TV series that had already proven its viewership than the leads in the new American TV series. Of course, Michelle Simmons didn't say this to show off. It was more to get closer to Eric. After all, Eric was the creator of the X-Files series. But at the same time, this also proved Michelle Simmons's outstanding ability. Developing as a film agent is indeed a good choice, but it shouldn't be so easy to take care of both sides, right? I'll arrange it, Michelle Simmons said confidently. She had also made up her mind that if everything went well in Hollywood, she would transfer her clients to other agents. This was a very easy choice to make. The waiter quickly served lunch, and the few of them talked less. However, Michelle Simmons found that Eric was talking to her most of the time and did not talk much with Charlize Theron. This made her feel a little uneasy. After all, she was here to promote her clients this time. After lunch, the coffee was served. Eric looked at his watch and said to Nicole beside him, "Nicole, show Miss Theron around the park. I have something to discuss with Michelle alone." Charlize Theron was disappointed and a little confused when he heard this sentence. However, Michelle Simmons came back to her senses at this time. Eric had been asking about her work situation before, probably to test her workability. Since he had sent the other two away at this time, he must have more important cooperation to discuss with her. Nicole did not quite understand why Eric suddenly said this, but she still got up obediently and pulled Charlize Theron affectionately. "Charlie, let's go. I'll show you around the park. Maybe you'll come here often in the future." Charlize Theron could only smile obediently and obediently followed Nicole out of the restaurant. When they reached the door, he could not help but stop and look back. Nicole looked at the girl who still had some baby fat on her face, patted her on the shoulder, and said softly, "Don't worry. You shouldn't have made this trip in vain." I just... Charlize Theron looked at Nicole's expression and wanted to explain in a panic. However, the words that came out of his mouth turned into a question. "Miss Kidman, really?" "You'll know when you get back," Nicole replied with a smile. Then, she ignored Charlize Theron's clumsy probing and brought her around the studio like a hostess. These days, she had basically stayed in the studio with Eric during the day. She was also more familiar with this film and television base that was even larger than Universal Burbank Studios. The more she learned, the more she could feel the powerful strength that Firefly Pictures had accumulated in just a few years. After Nicole and Charlize left, Eric handed the sketch that he had hurriedly drawn before the meal to Michelle Simmons and said, "I think you should have heard some news from Kapoor. This is a concept sketch that I drew before you came over." Michelle Simmons took it and saw the silhouettes of three women sketched with a pencil on the paper. Although the sketch was very sloppy, she could immediately feel the heroic spirit of the three women. In 1976, ABC TV launched a TV series called Charlize's Angels. Because of the feminist trend it advocated, it was very popular at that time. "I wonder if you've seen it before?" Michelle Simmons nodded and said, "I've seen some of it. At that time, I also liked this TV series very much. That's for the best. I've already bought the movie adaptation rights of this TV series. I plan to change it into a female action movie series. The style is similar to the 007 series," Eric said and pointed to the seat where Charlize Theron had just sat. "Charlize can be counted as one. At present, I still lack two female leads." Michelle Simmons was a little tempted, but she was not too sure. She asked, "Mr. Williams, are you saying that you want me to find two more female leads for this movie?" "Yes, because it's a new series. I hope to use newcomers who are about the same age as Charlize Theron. However, their acting skills must be good enough," Eric said and stretched out 2 fingers. 2 months. "Are you willing to take this job?" Michelle Simmons hesitated for a moment. This was definitely a good opportunity for her, but it was easier said than done to find a newcomer with good acting skills. After a moment of silence, Michelle Simmons seemed to have thought of something and asked tentatively, "Mr. Williams, how about this?" It's not easy to find girls who meet your requirements in North America. However, I can try in Europe and find some actresses who have already made a name for themselves in Europe but don't have any influence in North America. This way, I can judge their acting skills based on their works and basically meet your requirements." Eric thought for a moment and nodded. "Not bad. This is indeed a good idea. Let's do it according to your method. Then, Mr. Williams, do you have any other requests?" Eric thought for a moment and felt that there was no need to imitate the original version and use female stars of different races to please different races. He said, "In addition to being beautiful, I hope that they have their own characteristics. This is because what I want to create is not the 3 silly and sweet female vase stars in the TV version, but a female agent movie with a distinct character. In my idea, they have different pasts, skills, and distinct personalities. Also, after signing the contract, they will first undergo physical training for at least 3 months. You can tell them this in advance. The training will be very strict. If they can't stand it, it's best not to join." Michelle Simmons smiled and said, "I don't think any girl will be stupid enough to quit your movie, Mr. Williams." Eric shook his head. "I don't plan to direct this series, but I will participate in the script writing. In Hollywood, who doesn't know that as long as you participate in a movie, it's your movie, whether or not you will personally direct it?" "Thank you for your compliment, Michelle," Eric said with a smile. "This is definitely not a compliment, but a fact." "Okay." Eric smiled and raised his wrist to look at his watch. "Then, let's call it a day. I still have work in the afternoon." The two stood up, and Eric extended his hand to Michelle Simmons again. "Happy working with you." Michelle Simmons smiled and extended her hand. "Happy working with you. I can't take you into these 2 studios. These are the most advanced virtual digital studios in Hollywood. They are dedicated to shooting special effects scenes. The cost of this studio alone is more than $20 million, twice as expensive as ordinary studios. The equipment inside is even more expensive. Many of them are specially developed in the digital field and can't be seen on the market." Nicole pointed to a studio beside her that was specially equipped with security guards and introduced it to Charles Theron with a little pride. As she spoke, the handbag hanging on her elbow buzzed. She quickly took out her mobile phone to answer the call. After a few simple words, Nicole said to Charles Theron, "They're done talking. Let's go back." Charles Theron, who was already a little absent-minded, immediately perked up when he heard this. He followed Nicole to the administrative district. After saying goodbye, Eric specially sent an electric car to send the 2 women out of the studio. Then, he walked with Nicole to the post-production center. "What did you talk about?" Nicole finally couldn't hold back and asked curiously. Eric said, "Aren't there 3 female leads in Whopper of Charming Dolls? I also gave the task of finding the other 2 angels to Michelle Simmons." Nicole said in surprise, "Then, aren't you afraid that when the movie becomes popular in the future, she will use the 3 female leads to threaten Firefly to offer a higher price?" Eric said without the slightest worry, "You should also be able to see that this is a very smart woman. She won't do such a stupid thing that lacks foresight. Moreover, if the 3 female leads belong to different managers or agencies, once the movie is successful, it will be more troublesome to negotiate the sequel. Of course, I will let Firefly draft the contract in advance. At least, I will ensure that the female leads won't cause too much trouble in the trilogy." Nicole asked, "Didn't you say that you want to imitate the 007 series? What about after the trilogy?" For such a big-budget movie series, the trilogy will take at least 5 to 6 years. Who knows what will happen by then? At most, the series will be rebooted and the female lead will be changed. Didn't 007 also change many male leads? Chapter 5:18. The electric scooter sent them all the way to the entrance of the cinema. As soon as they walked out of the cinema, Charlize Theron couldn't wait to ask, "Michelle, is there a result?" Michelle Simmons nodded. "Let's talk about it in the car." Seeing Michelle Simmons' action, Charlize Theron finally felt relieved. After a moment of excitement, it was followed by a faint sense of loss. For this meeting, she had prepared for so long and even owed a small debt to her agent. She didn't expect that during the whole process, Eric Williams would only say some polite words to her. He didn't even look at her too much. People's minds were often like this. Although Charlize Theron seemed to obey her agent's arrangements on the surface, she still had her own little calculations in private. However, she didn't even have a chance to implement these little schemes during the whole meeting. The two of them got in the car. Michelle Simmons was also thinking about her own matters. It wasn't until the car drove out of Santa Monica that she realized that Charlize Theron hadn't spoken for a long time. "Are you a little disappointed?" Michelle Simmons glanced at Charlize Theron in the passenger seat. Charlize Theron subconsciously wanted to deny it, but when she saw her agent smile, she nodded slightly. "I didn't make it clear just now. It's like this." After organizing her words, Michelle Simmons said, "Mr. Williams said that he had seen your performance in the Buffy audition. It was not bad, so you have successfully got the role. However, there are a total of 3 female leads in that movie, and you are only one of them." Charlize Theron showed a happy expression to her agent. However, Michelle Simmons still saw the disappointment of the girl next to her and explained, "This is a movie that is absolutely centered around the female lead. The investment scale is comparable to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and it is personally directed by Eric Williams. So, you should be grateful for your luck. If this movie publicly recruited the female lead, it would be enough to make all the actresses of the right age in Hollywood go crazy. In that case, you wouldn't have any chance at all." Then, Charlize Theron thought for a moment and asked, "From what happened today, since he's not interested in me, how did I get the role?" "Who knows? Maybe you just happened to be there." Michelle Simmons had also thought of this problem. Although she was somewhat puzzled, she didn't have any intention of delving deeper. Perhaps other than Eric Williams himself, no one knew why. As for what the other party was thinking, she had no intention of personally asking. As she spoke, Michelle Simmons saw a large Blockbuster video rental store by the side of the road. She parked the car by the side of the road and walked in with Charlize Theron. After searching for a while, Michelle Simmons found a complete set of videotapes of the television series version of Charlie's Angels. She didn't choose to rent it but bought it directly. Although she had watched this television series before, it was more than 10 years ago. Since she had accepted the task of choosing the female lead, Michelle Simmons planned to watch the television series carefully and do her job carefully. When Charlize Theron saw the figures of the 3 hot girls on the videotape box, she understood that she might be acting in the movie version of this television series. Charlie's Angels was a television series that aired in 1976. At that time, Charlize Theron had just been born and lived far away in a small farm in South Africa. It was impossible for her to come into contact with such things. The two of them carried the bag full of videotapes back to the car. Michelle Simmons drove and continued the original topic. "Anyway, you've got the role now, so there's no need to find out why you got it. After all, you don't have anything that others can covet. If Eric Williams wants something from you, there's no need to beat around the bush. So just do what you have to do." Charlize Theron held a videotape in her hand and looked at the text summary on the back of the videotape. Hearing her agent's words, she said, "Then what should I do next?" Michelle Simmons thought for a moment and said, "I remember that you don't have a driver's license, right? In the next 2 months, learn how to drive first and get your license. This is an action movie, so you'll definitely come into contact with driving scenes. I also need to leave Los Angeles for a while. After 2 months, your schedule will be arranged by the film company. Williams said that you'll undergo 3 months of training." Speaking of this, Michelle Simmons added on Eric's original words. "He said that the 3 months of training will be very difficult and strict. If you can't take it, it's best to quit first." Of course, Charlize Theron couldn't quit. However, she caught the other meaning in her agent's words. "Did you just say, we?" Michelle Simmons didn't expect Charlize Theron to be so sensitive. She said, "Yes, you. Besides you, I still have to look for the other 2 girls. According to Williams' request, I need to go to Europe. If everything goes well, it should be quick." It won't take more than 2 months. This is the deadline he gave. Then what should I do? Charlize Theron didn't have the time to think about the other 2 competitors in the future. If her manager left, she definitely wouldn't be able to stay in Kapoor Sid's mansion in Beverly Hills, and the money in her card wouldn't be enough to live in Los Angeles for 2 months. Michelle Simmons also understood Charlize Theron's meaning. She said, "I'll arrange it for you. The expenses will be deducted from your salary in the future. Before you leave, I'll sign your contract with Firefly. Then, you'll have an official contract." Ever since she was signed by Michelle Simmons last fall, this was the first time Charlize Theron heard the word salary being associated with her. This time, she was really excited. "Michelle, how much will my salary be?" Michelle Simmons tapped her fingers on the steering wheel and thought for a moment. She said, "For this kind of big production, even if you're a newcomer, your salary shouldn't be too little. However, the salary of female stars is usually lower than that of male stars. Moreover, Charlie's Angels has 3 female leads. So, I'll have to contact them to know the exact salary. I'm guessing your salary should be between $100,000 to $200,000. Of course, if the movie is a big hit in the future, the producers will definitely give you some extra rewards." There was one more thing that Michelle Simmons didn't mention. Among the 3 female leads in the plan, Charlize Theron's salary should be the lowest. The other 2 female leads were planned to use female stars who had already made a name for themselves in Europe. So, even if they didn't have much influence in North America, their salary would be correspondingly higher. Although this figure was a far cry from the multimillion-dollar movie stars she often saw in magazines, Charlize Theron was still very satisfied. At least this was a good start. She wasn't the kind of person who would bite off more than she could chew. Moreover, this amount of money should be enough for her to not have to worry about trivial things like making a living for a long time. She could focus on preparing for the movie. A few days later, Michelle Simmons signed the contract with Firefly on behalf of Charlize Theron. Although she and Charlize Theron were a little confused about the unfamiliar production company, Flower Pictures, the $200,000 salary was still a surprise to both of them. Although this number was nothing compared to the production cost that was destined to exceed $50 million, it was the best-case scenario that Michelle had expected. However, perhaps because of this relatively generous salary, there was also an option contract attached to the contract. After Charlize Theron starred in the first movie of Charlize Theron, he would have to star in 2 more sequels within the next 5 years. At the beginning of March, after the last period of intense work, Eric successfully completed all the post-production work for Jurassic Park. After watching the movie, Eric was full of confidence in the movie's box office prospects. Compared to the version in his memory, except for the same ups and downs, this version of Jurassic Park was even better than the original version in terms of special effects. After all, the movie in the original space-time was Spielberg's work after the failure of Captain Hawk. Although it was a great success in the end, during the production process, the movie company wasn't 100% confident. Therefore, the budget was tighter and many details couldn't be perfected 100%. However, Eric's version of the movie burned $75 million in the project budget alone. With the idea that if you want to do a good job, you have to use the best tools possible. In order to provide special effects technical support for this series, Digital Domain had been conducting the corresponding technical research and development since it was first established. In the process, they also spent a lot of money. After Jurassic Park was completed, the movie's marketing plan was quickly launched. A week later, Firefly released the first poster for Jurassic Park. Disney's theme stores also began to decorate Jurassic Park merchandise. With hundreds of Disney's merchandise stores all over North America and Europe, as long as the movie was successful, Firefly Pictures would be able to make a profit from the merchandise sales in the shortest time possible. Firefly had a total of 3 movies during the summer: Jurassic Park, Collision, and The Bug Crisis. Eric was well aware of the box office power of Jurassic Park. In order not to affect the box office of the other 2 movies, Jurassic Park was released on June 4th. Then on June 25th, The Bug Crisis, which was completely different from Jurassic Park, was released again. Collision, which was also a special effects movie, was released on July 2nd. Although the box office power of Jurassic Park was still there, it wouldn't have much of an impact on Collision. In the past few years, the movies released by Firefly had become the focus of attention of other film companies. Many people noticed something unusual after Firefly announced the release schedule. Previously, Firefly's release schedule had always been to release different films in 2 weeks intervals during the popular period. But if you didn't consider The Bug Crisis, a 3D animation released by Firefly's subsidiary Disney, the 2 movies released by Firefly this summer were released a whole month apart. Almost everyone quickly realized that Firefly must be very optimistic about Jurassic Park. Last year's global box office of nearly $700 million was still fresh in the minds of many people in Hollywood. Firefly obviously valued Jurassic Park more than Tornado. Due to various considerations, some of the more flexible second- and third-tier film companies directly chose to postpone their summer release in order to avoid Jurassic Park. As for the big film companies, Michael Eisner was also pressured by Universal executives to postpone The Fugitive, which was originally planned to be released at the end of June, to the middle of July. It was swapped with a mid-budget romance film. Although many people publicly criticized Michael Eisner for being too cautious, Michael Eisner insisted that he didn't explain too much to others. When Eric heard the news, he was a little impressed by Michael Eisner's courage. If Michael Eisner insisted on The Fugitive because he was afraid of losing face, then there would be a good show to watch. Some people took the initiative to retreat, of course. There were also people who didn't believe it. There were even 2 movies that wanted to pincer attack Jurassic Park. These 2 movies were Wind of the Mountain, starring Stallone, and Last Action Hero, starring Schwarzenegger. Both movies were produced by German-funded Karlock Film. One was scheduled to be released a week before Jurassic Park, and the other was scheduled to be released a week after Jurassic Park. Eric had long noticed these 2 big flops, so he asked the production department to temporarily postpone the salary negotiation with Arnold Schwarzenegger for True Lies. He didn't expect these 2 movies to go head-to-head with Jurassic Park without hesitation. After finishing the post-production of Jurassic Park, Eric didn't have time to rest. A series of tedious things needed to be handled by him personally. Under David Geffen's recommendation, the male lead of Interview with the Vampire at Night was finally determined to be Tom Cruise. The second male lead was taken by an Australian actor under Pi Kingsley. Eric didn't have any information about the actor named Jack Slater in his memory. It was probably the result of the butterfly effect. In terms of the actors, the only thing Eric intervened was to find Kirsten Dunst, who was said to have the soul of a 35-year-old. The little girl was only 11 years old at this time, but the results of the audition were very satisfactory to the directors, including Neil Jordan. Chapter 519. After collaborating with Columbia on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, according to the original contract, there were still plans to collaborate on 4 other movies. After getting the juicy Columbia overseas distribution resources, Eric no longer had much enthusiasm. However, after Eric completed the post-production of Jurassic Park, Peter Guber kept pestering him. Not only did he call him a few times a day, but he also went to Firefly's headquarters or the Pointy Corner Manor every few days. Eric had no choice but to start selecting the remaining projects. After all, Firefly had 60% of the profits, and he couldn't just pick a few movies to deal with it. That would be equivalent to cheating himself. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. The salary negotiation between Nicole and Universal for The Mummy project was also successfully completed. Nicole gave up $10 million in exchange for an 8% share of the profits of The Mummy. Eric heard that this contract also caused a lot of controversy within Universal. Michael Eisner wanted to pay Nicole in cash, but in order to reduce the investment risk, Universal's board of directors insisted on agreeing to Nicole's share of the profits. In the end, they even brought in the higher-ups of Panasonic. Michael Eisner had no choice but to agree under the pressure of Panasonic's higher-ups. After Eric saw the outline of the Mummy series drawn up by Universal, he confirmed that the second sequel would have an army of the undead. Therefore, he asked Digital Domain to take the initiative to contact Universal, wanting to take over the special effects production project of the Mummy series. Because Eric didn't care about the cost of technology research and development, Industrial Light and Magic was far behind Digital Domain in terms of CG special effects. Although Michael Eisner had reached a long-term cooperation agreement with Industrial Light and Magic with Spielberg's help, he couldn't refuse Digital Domain's request to cooperate. After all, he couldn't refuse to make Universal's movies look better in terms of special effects. However, Michael Eisner didn't give all the special effects of The Mummy to Digital Domain. Instead, he subcontracted the special effects to Industrial Light and Magic and Digital Domain. Eric was only interested in the special effects of the Army of the Undead, so he didn't raise any objections. The sale of TG Film Company to Fox was only to confirm the intention. The specific deal would only be implemented after TG completed this year's project. Drew and Elizabeth still focused on the production of Buffy and Jim Carrey's new film. The episode with Charlize Theron didn't affect the progress of Buffy, determining the female lead. If everything went well, the TV series would start production at the end of March. After a period of research, Jim Carrey's new film was confirmed to be the sequel to Detective Airplane at the end of last year. In the original spacetime, the sequel did much better than the first one. Eric also stepped in and gave some suggestions for the script. Because TG Film Company wasn't in a hurry to sell, Drew couldn't leave in a short period of time. The production of Thunderbolt Girls wasn't in a hurry. Eric originally planned to hand over the script of Thunderbolt Girls to the scriptwriter team at Firefly. However, after thinking about it, he decided to do it himself. Anyway, because of the birth of the two little guys, he would definitely have some free time in New York. During this time, he could slowly come up with the script for Thunderbolt Girls. Since the idea was to imitate the 007 series, Thunderbolt Girls needed a complete world and story background. In this regard, Eric, who had countless movie plots in his mind, was definitely better than anyone else. Therefore, during this period of time, Eric had been carrying a small notebook with him. He would record down the inspiration that came to him from time to time about Thunderbolt charming dolls. In between these trivial matters, Forbes magazine would also add to the mess. At the beginning of March, Forbes magazine officially announced their annual list of the 400 richest people in North America. Although Eric didn't appear on the list, his net worth of $7.5 billion still attracted a lot of attention from the media. After all, although Eric's wealth wasn't the highest on the list, his age was very eye-catching. After his birthday in May, Eric was only 23 years old. Even Bill Gates, who had a net worth of more than $5 billion, couldn't compare with him. Although Bill Gates was once called the youngest billionaire, he would be 40 years old in 2 years. Of course, if it was just his age, it wouldn't be a big problem. But as for the source of Eric's wealth, although Forbes magazine gave a clear analysis, many media still had all kinds of malicious speculations. Some people even strongly called for the federal government to conduct a related investigation and give the taxpayers an explanation. Of course, there was no explanation, but it was certain that there would be controversy. In this chaotic environment, Eric was busy until the end of March. After he finished all his work, he hurriedly left everything behind and rushed to New York. In East Hampton, Long Island, because the two women were going to live there for a long time, the rented house had been cancelled. In January, Eric asked Chris, who was in New York, to help him buy a small 5-acre manor not far from the sea. When he came to New York again, Virginia and Joanna had already moved in. At the end of March, the weather in New York was still cold. Although it didn't snow again, the highest temperature still didn't exceed 15 degrees, and occasionally dropped below zero. Eric didn't feel at a loss like many workaholics when he suddenly came to this small manor, which was like a paradise. Instead, he enjoyed the sudden tranquility very much. For the two women now, it was definitely not suitable for them to go out in the morning and evening. They would only go out for a walk when the weather was warm at noon. It was a rare sunny day in New York. There was no wind, and staying under the sun gave people a warm feeling. At this time, Eric was standing on the lawn, which was just a little green, with a drawing folder in front of him and a charcoal pencil in his hand. He was whispering to himself as he drew Joanna, who was sitting quietly on the bench in front of him, on the white paper. The woman said that she wanted to keep it as a souvenir and show the little guy how his mother looked when she was pregnant. Because of the nourishment during pregnancy, Joanna's cheeks were not as thin as before. She looked plump and pretty, and with her charming eyes, she looked even more beautiful. As for Virginia, she absolutely wouldn't allow Eric to make any comments about her round face. The little woman also noticed that Eric was also looking forward to the little guy in her belly, so she was even more fearless. The sound of a car came, but Eric didn't look back. Before he came to New York, Chris said that he would visit with his girlfriend, and he called last night to tell him about it. Not far away, Virginia and Chris' voices could be heard. After exchanging a few words, they walked towards Eric's direction. Eric saw Joanna slightly raise her chin and smile behind him. He turned his head and saw that the three people had already arrived behind him. "Eric, your drawing is so beautiful," Emily Brighton said with some envy. She used to be very interested in drawing, but unfortunately, she had to apply for business school in order to take over the family business. Chris joked, "Yeah, if you don't plan to be a director in the future, you can also rely on this skill to make a living." Virginia looked at the drawing that was about to be completed and felt a little jealous. However, she was determined not to leave any image because she felt that this was the ugliest period of her life. Thinking of this, Virginia subconsciously glared at Eric and vented her little resentment on Eric. "It's all this guy's fault, for sure." Emily and Chris, who were standing on the other side, both noticed Virginia's expression and snickered, but they didn't say anything. Eric carefully sketched the lines and listened to Chris's teasing. He smiled and said, "It's not like I can't consider your opinion. Anyway, I have nothing to do recently, so I can go to Times Square and earn some money to buy a few packets of milk powder for the two little guys." Of course, this was a joke. After a few words, Virginia pulled Emily to prepare lunch. During Eric's absence, Emily often came to visit the two girls, and the three of them had become very good friends. Chris didn't leave. He put his hands in the pockets of his coat and watched Eric draw. He asked, "How long do you plan to stay in New York this time?" "If there's nothing else, I'll try to stay until the summer break," Eric thought and said with some uncertainty. Chris smiled and said, "Judging from your tone, I bet you won't stay that long." Eric also shook his head gently. "It can't be helped. Speaking of which, I envy many other people in the same industry. They can take a few months of vacation every year. I heard that the boss of Telcom, John Malone, only works for 6 months a year and takes his family around the world for a vacation for the rest of the year." Telcom was a major shareholder of QVC, which was controlled by Barry Diller. Eric had been paying attention to the bidding between QVC and Viacom for Paramount, so he happened to hear this anecdote. "They are all old men, and they are successful. Of course, they can live comfortably. Also, they are not like you. You are only 23 years old, and you are in the top 10 of the Forbes World's Billionaires list." Eric sighed slightly. "Yes, there are gains and losses. I hope the two of them won't be too unfamiliar with me in the future." Chris didn't know how to continue the topic. He thought for a while and said, "Speaking of the Forbes Rich list, I have registered several companies in Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and other places. In the future, we can invest in several companies through these offshore companies and gradually dilute Firefly's shares in these companies. I have recently begun to talk to Steve Case about AOL's shares. The 30% shares we now own can also be distributed among several foundations. In this way, Firefly can become an empty shell that won't appear on the list of listed company shareholders in the future." "That's good. I was blocked by those paparazzi in Los Angeles a few days ago. Some of them even fanned the flames. It was really annoying." Chris smiled and said, "Even if we hide Firefly's investment, if Firefly Pictures continues to develop at the current speed, you will be pushed to the top of the list sooner or later." Now, many people have already questioned Forbes magazine's underestimation of Firefly Pictures' market value. Wall Street even scoffed at the valuation made by Forbes. "Let's talk about it when the time comes. At worst, I will split Firefly Pictures shares," Eric said. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, How's the Hotmail online mailbox? I haven't seen any news on the recent documents. They are already building the server, Chris said with a helpless expression. The core code for the online mailbox has almost been completed. Steve Mitnick is not satisfied with the way the mailbox password is encrypted. He led his team to develop a new encryption algorithm. This time, if there are no other accidents, it will be used in April. However, I have been keeping an eye on the internet market. So far, I haven't found any technology companies that are researching similar technologies. So, we can wait a little longer. Even if there are competitors, with the IE and Yahoo portals in our hands, we can promote it much faster than them. Eric nodded. He was getting more and more interested in the guy who was also called Steve. He said, "If you have time, you must meet him. I'm most interested in perfectionists and paranoid people, especially those who can persist in their perfectionism." Chris curled his lips and said, "When you see him, you might have the urge to beat him up." After finishing the painting, it was almost lunchtime. Eric took down the drawing board and walked to Joanna, who was sitting on the bench. He whispered a few words with the woman. The two then said goodbye to Chris and went straight to the villa. Chris looked at the backs of the two people and the lonely easel on the lawn. He shrugged helplessly and scolded Eric for being inhumane. Then, he rolled up his sleeves, took the easel apart, and followed them. During lunch, the dining room became the home of the three women. Women were naturally talkative creatures. Coupled with the fact that Emily was already very familiar with the two women, she was also very talkative. During lunch, she chatted with the two women about the birth of the little ones until 18 years later. After lunch, she still wanted to continue. Leaving Eric and Chris behind, she gathered in a small living room of the villa to discuss a small prenatal party. Eric and Chris were not very interested in these topics, so they had to hide in the study and talk about the company's affairs. Chapter 520. A few days after Eric rushed to New York, the 65th Academy Awards were held at the Los Angeles Music Center. Schindler's List was unquestionably the biggest winner. It received a total of 12 nominations and won 8 Oscars. Steven Spielberg finally won the Academy Award for Best Director as he had always wanted. Steven Spielberg had been in the industry for 25 years, ever since he pretended to be an employee of Universal Pictures and entered the studio in Burbank. After that, he had achieved a series of box office results with films such as Jaws, Aliens, and Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. He could be said to be the most successful commercial film director in Hollywood and enjoyed a very high status in Hollywood. However, now that he was recognized by the Academy of Film, he was so excited that he shed tears on the small podium. Although it was close to midnight in the Eastern Time, the two women accompanied Eric to watch the entire award ceremony. When she noticed Spielberg wiping his tears, Virginia whispered to Eric if he would also be like this when he won the Academy Award in the future. Eric remembered how he felt when he won the Best Adapted Screenplay Award for Smelling Women 2 years ago. At that time, he thought that as a person who had been reborn, he would be indifferent to the award. However, in the atmosphere of the award ceremony, it was almost impossible to remain calm. However, Eric was sure that if he really won the Best Director Oscar in the future, he would definitely be excited, but it was unlikely that he would shed tears like Spielberg, because Spielberg still retained a childish nature in his middle age, while Eric had long lost his childish heart. Last year's Tornado won the Best Visual Special Effects Award without any surprise. Stan Winston was there to receive the award in person. Because Eric and Joanna were absent, and because there were no important nominations, except for a few technical staff for Best Sound and Stan Winston, the main crew members of Tornado did not attend the Oscars this time. It was better for Tornado to win a technical award, but the other nominated films of Firefly Pictures all went back empty-handed. Therefore, intentionally or unintentionally, after the Academy Award ceremony, in addition to congratulating Spielberg, who had finally achieved success after more than 20 years, many media outlets turned their attention to Firefly. They criticized Firefly's movies for being too commercialized, and even Disney had become mercenary. They only knew how to make profitable commercial movies to earn profits, but they had forgotten to pursue the artistic and social aspects of the movie itself. Eric glanced at these sour articles. After all, the performance of Firefly Pictures last year was too strong. 27% of the total box office in North America was more than the second and third place combined. It was not surprising that the other film companies felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. Thinking of the several films that had already started the summer promotion, Eric thought that after this year, the other 6 would probably be even angrier, but they would definitely get used to this situation sooner or later. After April, Virginia and Joanna were due to give birth. Everyone in the small manor, including Eric, became very cautious. Because the 2 women were pregnant at the same time, although the possibility of the babies being born at the same time was very low, Eric still prepared 2 identical delivery rooms in the villa. He even prepared 2 teams of doctors for the delivery of the babies. This went on until April 9th, which was supposed to be an ordinary Friday. After Eric had lunch, he went to the study to deal with some documents sent from Los Angeles as usual. Joanna, on the other hand, was sitting beside Eric like a shadow, reading a book in her hand quietly. In the face of media criticism about the excessive commercialization of Firefly Pictures, although Firefly was very indifferent from top to bottom and did not make a public response no matter what the outside world said, within Firefly, after several discussions, the management agreed that the Oscars were, after all, an important part of Hollywood. Even if it was to maintain a public image, Firefly should not be overly ignored. After a few days of discussion, the management discussed 2 options. One was to set up a dedicated indie film department for Firefly, which would invest a fixed amount or buy a few indie films for Oscars every year. The other plan was to acquire a second or third tier film company that specialized in indie films. Moreover, Michael Lynn and others even had a target, Mira Mike. Eric was not surprised to see this name. A few years ago, Mira Mike was only involved in some peripheral awards such as Best Foreign Language Film. However, in recent years, as the Wayne Stan brothers became more and more experienced in award public relations, almost every year they tried to get their hands on the core Oscars such as Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor and Best Actress. And this year, although Mira Mike was facing losses due to the excessive expansion of the production and distribution business, and had to choose the road of sale, The Crying Game still brought Mira Mike 3 heavyweight Oscars nominations for Best Film, Best Director, and Best Actor. If it were not for Schindler's List, it would not be impossible for The Crying Game to win 1 or 2 of these awards. However, looking at the document in his hand, Eric was no longer interested in acquiring Mira Mike. Perhaps because of the comments in the media during this period, the Wayne Stan brothers thought that Firefly's intention to acquire Mira Mike was more urgent than the other competitors. Therefore, they offered a price of $100 million, hoping to retain a certain amount of shares and maintain Mira Mike's independent operation. A few years ago, the reason why Eric chose New Line and Mira Mike as the acquisition targets to expand Firefly was mainly because the 2 film companies already had relatively mature distribution channels. Although the scale was very small, as long as there were good movies, they could expand very quickly. In the end, he chose New Line, mainly because New Line's scale was larger. Now, Eric didn't have the same thoughts about Mira Mike. After seeing the conditions proposed by the Wayne Stan brothers, he was even less interested. If after acquiring Mira Mike, he still let the Wayne Stan brothers operate this film company alone. The 2 brothers were not satisfied with only making Academy Award-winning films and wholeheartedly wanted to expand Mira Mike. In the future, Firefly and Mira Mike would definitely repeat the mistakes of Disney and Mira Mike. A separation was almost inevitable. Eric didn't intend to pull the 2 brothers with their own thoughts into the Disney system and make things difficult for him. After thinking about it, Eric decided to use the first set of plans. After making up his mind, Eric turned on the computer and began to type his opinions on the blank document. Just as he typed a few lines of words, someone suddenly knocked on the study door. Eric frowned. Before he could respond, a maid pushed the door open and poked her head in. She said anxiously, "Mr. Williams, madam's water broke." Eric suddenly stood up. "Did you call the doctor?" Madam just felt a little uncomfortable in her stomach. Ms. Paquin just came to check on her. Madam is now in the delivery room. Eric turned around the desk and was about to walk out. After taking a few steps, he turned his head and looked at Joanna. "Joan, did you?" Joanna closed the book and stood up with a smile. How can there be such a coincidence? Don't worry about me. Go and have a look. Then you have a good rest here. You don't have to go, Eric said and followed the maid out. After passing through the long corridor, they came to a room facing south at the other end of the villa. Eric had already heard Virginia's cry of pain from outside. Just as he was about to push the door open, a nurse came out of another room with a tray. Seeing Eric's action, she quickly stopped him. Mr. Williams, you can't go in like this. You have to put on sterile clothes first. Mary, help Mr. Williams get his clothes. Eric agreed. He hurriedly changed his clothes and finally walked into the delivery room. This refurbished delivery room was definitely not inferior to any high-end ward in any hospital. All the equipment was brand new. When Eric promised the private doctor in charge of the two women that he would donate all the equipment in the delivery room to him after using them, the doctor was so excited that he almost forgot himself. Virginia, who was lying on the hospital bed, saw Eric and immediately reached out her small hand. Eric, I'm here. Eric stepped forward and held the woman's small hand. He comforted her for a while before looking at the middle-aged woman wearing a mask beside him. Ms. Paquin, how is the situation? Don't worry, Mr. Williams. I'm here. There won't be any problems. Eliza will come over later too. The Eliza mentioned by the middle-aged woman was a doctor from another team. Eric nodded. Looking at the busy doctor and nurse, he did not disturb them and quietly stayed by Virginia's side. A woman's first child always took a long time. Eric was originally prepared for this matter. However, Virginia's water broke in the afternoon and it was tormented until early in the morning. The little guy was unwilling to come out. Virginia, who was a little pale, heard Eric discussing with the doctor in a low voice that once 12 hours passed and the little guy did not move, they would perform a cesarean section. She immediately cried out in a low voice, Eric, I don't want a cesarean section. I heard that the child will become stupid. Don't talk nonsense. How can it become stupid? Lie down properly. Eric sat down next to the woman again, held her hand, and comforted her in a low voice. I will. Anyway, I don't want a cesarean section. Eric said with a little helplessness, then you have to work harder and let the little guy come out quickly. It hurts. Then a cesarean section. Boo-hoo. It's all your fault. Yes. It's my fault. Don't cry. Relax. I'm hungry. There's porridge in the kitchen. I'll get it for you, Eric said and hurried out of the delivery room. The hostess was in labor and no one was resting. The whole villa was brightly lit. Eric passed by the living room. Joanna was sitting on the sofa with a maid and whispering something. Seeing Eric come out, Joanna quickly asked, Eric, how is it? Eric shook his head. Dr. Parquin said that if there's still no movement after 12 hours, it's better to perform a cesarean section. I'll get some food for Vicky. Joan, you should go to bed early. It's okay. I can't sleep either. Joanna shook her head gently and stroked her abdomen. Perhaps it was because of Virginia, she felt a slight pain in her abdomen. However, she just treated it as a normal phenomenon many times in the past. In order not to worry Eric, she did not say it out loud. She continued, Gina just asked if you want to eat. Go to the kitchen and get it. Seeing Eric go into the kitchen and quickly come out with a bowl, the maid beside Joanna said softly, Mr. Williams is so considerate. Yes, Joanna said softly. She felt a sharp pain in her abdomen again. She frowned slightly and reached for the remote control next to her. She wanted to turn on the TV to distract herself. She moved her body slightly and touched the remote control. At the same time, she saw a light water stain on the sofa. The maid was about to say something, but when she followed Joanna's gaze, she suddenly covered her mouth and shouted, Oh, my God. After saying this, the maid got up and ran nervously to the delivery room. Joanna's water broke. Eric was almost at a loss when he heard the news. However, the doctors calmly divided into two small teams, one on each side. To be on the safe side, Dr. Parkwin suggested that Eric could contact one or two more doctors. Encountering such a coincidence, Eric didn't care about confidentiality at all and immediately agreed to the doctor's suggestion. Seeing that Eric agreed, Dr. Parkwin recommended two of his colleagues to Eric. The nearby residents had already noticed the brightly lit manor. After the two helicopters flew and landed in the small manor, they became even more curious. Some people even enthusiastically came over to ask, but they didn't get an answer from the guards. Eric briefly talked with the doctor who had just arrived by helicopter and was a little surprised to see him. Then he went into Joanna's delivery room. Seeing Eric coming over, Joanna, who was biting her lips slightly, immediately reached out her small hand to him. Seeing the man holding her small hand and comforting her softly, Joanna, who had been quiet all this time, couldn't help but cry, "Eric? It's okay, it's okay. It'll be over soon. Don't worry." Eric comforted her and reached out to wipe the corner of Joanna's eyes. Joanna shook her head gently and said sadly and timidly, "No, Eric, I mean, my child is not called Hawaii." Chapter 521. Eric was puzzled. It took him a while to realize that this was the name that he had given to the baby in Joanna's belly. At that time, he thought of a certain skit and came up with this name. It was originally a joke. After the discussion that day, Eric didn't mention this to the two women again. He didn't expect that Joanna would keep it in her heart. Moreover, the woman was obviously very dissatisfied with this nonsense name. She couldn't help but say it out loud now. Although Eric didn't know whether to laugh or cry, he still followed Joanna's tone and said, "Okay, not Hawaii, not Hawaii. You can name the baby whatever you like. I won't interfere." Joanna smiled and nodded as if a big stone had been lifted from her heart. After thinking for a while, she looked at Eric and whispered, "Hawaii. Hawaii doesn't sound good. Yeah, it's too bad. It's all my fault. When the baby is born, you can slowly give it a good name." Eric nodded and said. He and the two women didn't pay special attention to the gender of the baby. Until now, they had only used it as a substitute. Although Joanna wasn't sick, her quiet personality made Eric subconsciously feel that she would definitely take much longer to give birth than Virginia. Eric was prepared to not rest for a long time. However, to Eric's surprise, only a little more than 4 hours later, the baby's clear cry came from Joanna's side. "Congratulations, Mr. Williams. It's a cute little princess." Eric heard the news and just walked out from Virginia's side. A nurse said to Eric, "Thank you, you've worked hard." Eric thanked her and opened the door to enter Joanna's room. Joanna had been moved to the trauma room. She looked very weak, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the nurse who was giving the baby a warm bath. After a while, the nurse washed the baby, wrapped it and sent it to Joanna's side. "Eric, this is my daughter." Joanna looked sideways at the baby's wrinkled face and said softly. Eric squatted down beside the wound and said with a smile, "It's our daughter." "Yes, our daughter." Joanna also revealed a faint smile. She reached out her finger and gently touched the baby's face before carefully retracting it. A hint of hesitation flashed in her eyes, but she quickly looked up at Eric and said, "Eric, let's call this little guy Hawaii." "Ah." Eric opened his mouth, then smiled and said, "Forget it. When I came up with this name, I didn't put in much effort, and you don't like it." "No." Joanna shook her head gently and said with certainty, "It's called Hawaii, Hawaii Williams." Eric couldn't guess the woman's mind, so he nodded. "Well, as I said just now, you decide the name of the little guy." Joanna nodded and whispered in front of the little girl. Then, she asked Eric, "Hawaii. What should we call it?" Eric thought for a while and said according to the pronunciation of his mother tongue from his previous life, "Shashya, what do you think?" Joanna heard that Eric's pronunciation had nothing to do with the word Hawaii, so she asked, "Does this nickname have anything to do with Hawaii?" Eric explained, "Of course, according to the pronunciation of English, the nickname should be Haha. But I prefer the pronunciation of another language, Shashya. This name means summer." Summer represents vitality and blooming. Joanna didn't ask which language Eric was speaking. She repeated the nickname a few times and said with satisfaction, "Shasha, very good. Let's call her Shasha. By the way, how's Vicky? There are so many doctors here, so she should be fine." "But you know, most women take a long time to give birth for the first time," Eric said. Joanna nodded. "Well, you should go over there and take care of her." Eric didn't refuse. He was also worried about the other side. He got up and said, "I'll get someone to bring you something to eat. Then, go to bed early." "I know. Hurry up and go." Eric quickly went to another room. Virginia looked a little sad at this time. She originally thought that her child would be Eric's eldest son or daughter. She didn't expect it to become a younger brother or sister in the blink of an eye. Because 12 hours had passed, the baby was likely to be in unknown danger due to lack of oxygen if it was delayed any longer. The doctors were already preparing for a cesarean section, and Virginia didn't object at this time. However, perhaps feeling that his mother was going to be stabbed, the little guy, who had been quiet for a long time, finally decided to come out. The doctors had a simple discussion and cancelled the operation plan. More than 2 hours later, a chubby boy came into this world crying. Because the two little guys were born at the same time, the commotion was too big. Although several confidentiality contracts were added afterward, some information was inevitably leaked. However, because there were no photos or witnesses, only some tabloids attracted the attention of gossip lovers with specious headlines such as the birth of a Hollywood director's illegitimate child. The more credible large media outlets didn't rashly release the news. Most ordinary people who saw the news even just regarded it as another groundless Hollywood gossip. However, the ordinary people's sense of smell wasn't sharp enough, but it didn't mean that the media would be slow to react. In just a few days, the originally deserted East Hampton gradually gathered reporters from North America and even Europe. They easily found the small manor that Eric bought and waited. The small manor had long been empty. These people waited for several days, but of course, they didn't find anything. At this time, Eric had once again taken the two women to another place. This time, it was a farm that Eric borrowed, and the owner of the farm was Spielberg, who had just won the Oscar for Best Director. Magnificent Farm was the summer residence of Spielberg's family, but under normal circumstances, he still lived in Los Angeles. The two little guys had just been born and weren't suitable for long-distance travel. Buying or renting a place to live was also not something that could be done in a short period of time. Eric just happened to know that Spielberg had a manor in East Hampton, so he called him. After hearing Eric's reason, Spielberg readily lent the farm to Eric. The two little guys had been born for 7 days, and the two well-prepared mothers had arranged everything in an orderly manner. In addition, there were a few nannies watching over them, so Eric basically couldn't do anything. The day before yesterday, Eric enthusiastically changed his son's diaper. For some reason, the little guy started crying inexplicably, so Eric was kicked out of the baby's room by Virginia and ordered to not get close to her precious babies. Of course, this ban was just a joke, but the two mothers no longer asked Eric to help with anything. Eric suddenly became the most idle person in the manor. Before the children were born, Eric wasn't in the mood to do anything else. Now that the two little guys were born smoothly, Eric was relieved and started his work. In addition to the work documents that would be sent over from Los Angeles as usual, Eric began to write the setting for Charlie's Angels. In addition, another thing came from Chris. The beta version of Hotmail was finally online, and Eric personally used it. Although he was a little annoyed by the guy named Steve Mitnick, after using this email service, Eric was very satisfied. Due to various restrictions, many websites now had some lag, and many times there were problems such as loading difficulties. However, these problems were basically not seen on Hotmail, and all the email functions were very smooth. After using it, Eric immediately began to take the initiative to spread this communication method to the people around him. The management of Firefly was the first to accept this online email tool. Katzenberg and others now sent a few emails to Eric every day to discuss problems. At the same time, the Hotmail tool also began to be promoted through the eye-catching interface on Yahoo's homepage. Yahoo and IE now covered more than 90% of the internet users. Therefore, in just 3 days after the launch of Hotmail, people realized the convenience of this communication tool. In addition to the free nature of Hotmail's email, the registered users exceeded 1 million. Fortunately, Hotmail was well prepared and did not cause an outage due to excessive server load. However, according to the current speed of user expansion, perhaps within a month, Hotmail's coverage could reach the same level as Yahoo and IE. Chris was originally a little worried about the operating prospects of the three companies. After all, if the continuous free strategy was not profitable, no one could operate the company for a long time. Not to mention, with the explosion of the number of users, the operating costs would continue to increase. In the future, even Eric would not be able to bear the cost of only investing and not producing. However, seeing the expansion of Hotmail's user base, Chris quickly relaxed. Even if Hotmail's user base only reached 10 million in the future, with advertising and other operating methods, they could still make a good profit. Not to mention, with tens of millions of users, they could certainly continue to develop other ways to make money on the internet. At the same time as Hotmail was the new official version of IE. Previously, IE had been a beta version. The launch of the official version of IE also meant that the browser's technology had completely matured. It was almost impossible for other computer companies to surpass IE's technological advantage in a short period of time. Sitting by the empty swimming pool, Eric crossed his legs. There was a laptop on the round table. While thinking about these things, his fingers kept tapping on the keyboard. From time to time, he picked up the coffee next to him and took a few sips. He looked relaxed and comfortable. The child was successfully born. Virginia and Joanna both hinted that if Eric was busy, he could return to Los Angeles as soon as possible. There was no need to accompany them here. However, Eric himself was not in a hurry to return to Los Angeles. When he was in Los Angeles, he was so busy that his feet never touched the ground. Now that he had left Los Angeles for more than half a month, there seemed to be no signs of chaos there. As the boss, of course, he had to be lazy. The laptop made a soft beeping sound. Eric skillfully opened the browser and logged in to the mailbox. Although Hotmail had not launched a dedicated client yet, it could install a plugin in IE to prompt for sending and receiving messages. Other than a few women and close friends, the only people who knew Eric's personal email address were the executives of Firefly Pictures. Although only the executives above the level of department head could get Eric's personal email address, there were still a lot of people who knew about it. Although Eric seemed to have reminded them not to email him unless it was something important, he still received a lot of messages every day. Some people even snitched to Eric, which made him speechless. This was a work email from Jerry Bruckheimer. It was now less than 2 months before the release of Jurassic Park, and the film had entered the final intensive promotion period. The promotion and distribution of the film were mainly jointly handled by the distribution department of Firefly and the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer. Eric was reading the document when Joanna walked over with a pot of coffee with a smile. "I think you should be almost out of coffee, so I made you a new one." Joanna waved her hand, stepped over a few data cables on the ground, and walked to Eric's side. She filled Eric's cup with coffee and pulled a chair over to sit beside Eric. "Is Shasha asleep?" Eric asked casually. "Yes, sleepy little girl," Joanna said happily. She casually glanced at Eric's laptop screen and inadvertently noticed some sentences. She could not help but blink. Eric did not intend to hide anything. He pointed to the email on the screen and said, "Yesterday, at a promotional event in Seattle, a newspaper reporter asked me on the spot why I didn't participate in the promotion of Jurassic Park." At that time, Jerry led the team. He wanted to change the topic, but then another reporter boldly asked if I had an illegitimate child. These people are getting bolder and bolder. In the email, Jerry Bruckheimer simply described the episode that happened in Seattle yesterday, but he also expressed his concern in the email. Jurassic Park was about to be released, and many people in the circle more or less knew that Eric had a child. Bruckheimer was worried that before the movie was released, some people would make a fuss about it. Chapter 522. What are you going to do? Joanna asked Eric after reading the email carefully. Eric smiled and said, "Actually, it's not a big deal. I've always been single." Joanna blinked her slender eyes a few more times, and she more or less understood. Eric was not married, so it was not a big deal to have a child in advance. At most, he would be criticized by some conservative people. With his current power and fame, it would not cause any substantial harm to him. Then, what about the movie? Will it really affect it? Joanna pointed at the email. Eric smiled and patted Joanna's hand. "Don't worry, it won't affect it too much. You don't have to worry about these things. Just focus on taking care of the little girl. If you're bored and want to work, I can arrange 1 or 2 movies for you. Or you can do other things that you want to do. Haven't you been talking to Emily about fashion recently? Are you interested in designers?" Joanna shook her head. She held Eric's arm and leaned on him gently. She said, "I'm just chatting with Emily. I'm not like you. I only know how to act and nothing else." "Then forget it. If you want to do anything, just tell me." "Okay," Joanna replied in a low voice. After a moment of silence, she said, "Eric, I told my parents about Shasha's birth." Eric turned to look at the woman. "What did they say?" "They didn't say much. They just hope that I can live a better life." Eric held Joanna's hand and said, "I promise you and Shasha that you will live a good life." "I know." Joanna nodded and said, "There's one more thing." "What?" My little sister plans to come to America. My parents hope that I can take care of her." Eric was a little confused. It was the first time that he heard Joanna mention that she had a little sister. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it was necessary to tell you." Joanna looked at Eric and said, "Her name is Eva. Eva Pakula. She's 1 year younger than you." She was 1 year younger than him, which meant that Eva Pakula was only 22 years old. Eric thought for a moment and asked subconsciously, "Is Eva as pretty as you?" As soon as he said that, Eric felt his arm being pinched by Joanna. He immediately rubbed his arm and cried out in pain. Joanna released her fingers and glared at Eric, but she still said softly, "Of all the people who know us, Eva is the one who looks the most like me, especially her eyes." This time, Eric did not dare to talk nonsense. He nodded in agreement. "Good eyes, good eyes. Your eyes are the prettiest. So, what is Eva doing in America? Can I help?" "I wanted to ask for your help, but forget it. I'll tell Eva to stay away from you," Joanna said bluntly. Eric immediately put on a fawning smile. "All right, you can arrange it yourself. I won't interfere." "Well, if you need help, you can ask someone else. Just tell them that I asked." Joanna nodded and sighed. She said, "Eva wanted to come over a few years ago, but I insisted that she finish her university in Poland." Eric asked, "What is her major?" "English," Joanna said. She then looked at Eric. "Her English is more standard than mine. She doesn't speak that weird accent that you like." In order to film Tornado, Joanna had gone through a long period of language training to get rid of her accent. However, after filming Tornado, Joanna's accent returned. It was a kind of English that Eric could not describe clearly. It did sound weird, but Eric inexplicably liked Joanna's pronunciation. As the two of them were talking, Eric's mobile phone rang. When he picked up the phone, a female voice came from the other side. "Hello, is this Mr. Williams?" This mobile phone was a new number that Eric had gotten when he came to New York. Not many people knew it. Hearing the familiar yet strange female voice, Eric asked in confusion, "Yes, it's me. Who is this?" "Mr. Williams. I'm Michelle Simmons. I just came back from Europe. Mr. Fissman picked up your original number. He told me that I could use this number to contact you." Eric immediately thought of her. He said, "Michelle, did your trip to Europe go well?" "Yes, Mr. Williams. I've already found a few talented actresses according to your request. They are now in Los Angeles with me. I want to ask you if you can arrange to meet them? Eric thought for a moment and said, how about this? Fax me their information first. I'll take a look first. You take down their numbers. Michelle Simmons seemed to know something, so she didn't object. She said, wait a moment. I'll get a pen. After a while, Michelle Simmons took down the fax number and hung up. Seeing Eric hang up, Joanna asked, is there something urgent in Los Angeles that you need to deal with? Eric shook his head and smiled. No, don't worry. I said that I would try my best to stay here with you for a while. Joanna smiled and stood up. I just wanted to hear about the fax. Shall I get it for you? Well, it might take a while, Eric said. After Joanna left, Eric looked at the email on the computer screen. He thought for a while and replied to Jerry Bruckheimer. Then he closed the browser and started to work on the story setting of Charlie's Angels. After waiting for more than half an hour, Joanna didn't come back. Instead, Virginia came out with a stack of fax numbers. Hey, there are so many beauties. What are you going to do? Eric smiled and picked up the documents. Didn't I tell you that I'm going to change Charlie's Angels and make a female action movie? Virginia sat down on the chair that Joanna had just sat in. She took a few sips of Eric's coffee and asked, your next movie? Eric looked at the documents in his hand. He didn't realize the deeper meaning of Virginia's words. He nodded casually and said, yes, my next movie. Virginia immediately pulled a long face and said, no matter how I look at it, I feel that you're going to mess around with the female lead under the guise of a movie. Charlie's Angels, Humph, I've seen it. It's just 3 little bitches who show off their bodies. Eric finally understood that Virginia thought that he would personally direct Charlie's Angels. Looking at the woman's angry face, he wasn't angry. He just felt that the gentle woman had become a hot mother after giving birth. It wasn't that her body had become hotter, but that her temper had become hotter. He pushed a part of the story setting to Virginia and said, this is a very serious job. I'm only going to write the script. I don't intend to direct it myself. Virginia used the mouse to drag the document to the top. After reading a few paragraphs, she pulled the notebook towards her with interest. Seeing the woman's action, Eric took the stack of actress information from Michelle Simmons and moved it to the side. He flipped through it again. After a while, Eric's eyes stopped on an actress information. At this time, Virginia suddenly said, Eric, Jill Monroe, the genius girl with a high IQ, and Sabrina Wales, the female lead settings are okay. However, I think the setting of Kelly Garrett's character is a bit far-fetched. I've also seen Bruce Lee's action movies and know that Kung Fu is very powerful. However, Kelly Garrett's parents died in an accident when she was 6 years old. She was adopted by an old Chinese man who opened a martial arts dojo in Chinatown. Then, she learned very powerful Kung Fu. This won't work. Does Kelly Garrett have no other relatives? Even if she doesn't have any other relatives, according to the federal adoption law, it's impossible for her to be adopted by an old Chinese man. A lot of reasons don't make sense. Eric listened to Virginia's nagging and smiled slightly. These were just the settings he came up with in his mind. He would definitely make a lot of changes in the future. However, after looking at the information in his hand, Eric smiled and said, since it won't work, then let's change it. Maybe we can let the girl have a Chinese grandfather who knows Kung Fu. That would be reasonable. What do you think? Virginia looked at Eric. A Chinese grandfather who knows Kung Fu? Eric smiled and said, yes, I happen to have the information of an actress here. She's a quarter Chinese. She's very suitable. As he spoke, Eric jumped out and placed the information of the actress on the round table. Virginia picked it up and saw the picture of the elegant and cool girl. Then, her eyes fell on the girl's basic information and softly spelled out the girl's name, Kate Beckinsale. Eric had a smile on his face. The role of Kate Garrett in Whopper Charming Baby was the martial arts role that Eric had set for the Angel Group. Then, who was more suitable than Kate Beckinsale, who had the title of Hollywood's Violent Barbie in his previous life? At this time, Virginia was beside Eric and exclaimed, "Wow, a top student from Oxford University. No, according to her age, she should be in her second year now. Since she came to Hollywood, she probably can't continue her studies. Alright, don't dislike the top student just because you don't have the talent for learning." Eric took the information from Virginia's hand. Virginia didn't mind. She smiled and said, "Don't you think I don't know? Your other little beauty, Jennifer Connelly, just got her degree from Stanford." Eric retorted, "You have to have the ability to get into Stan University first. Do you have it?" "I don't care." Virginia got up indifferently and asked, "What do you want to eat tonight?" "I'll eat whatever my son eats. Is that okay?" "Bah, I'll starve you to death." Virginia blushed and rolled her eyes at Eric before leaving. Eric smiled and shrugged. He turned his gaze back to the information in his hand. Michelle Simmons didn't find many candidates, only 8. Although the information was very detailed, it didn't take long for him to finish reading it. Eric originally thought that he wouldn't meet any acquaintances, but when he flipped to the last page, a familiar picture of a Latin girl with a wild aura appeared before him. Penelope Cruz. Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked up and took the notebook to look at the character settings of the other angel, Sabrina Wales. Although it was a little different from the image in his memory, when he thought about it carefully, Penelope Cruz's temperament and image were very compatible with the character of Sabrina Wales. As for the last intelligent character, Jill Monroe, it naturally belonged to Charlize Theron, who had already signed the contract. Eric did not think too much. He picked up the mobile phone next to him, opened the contact list from the laptop, found Michelle Simmons' contact, and dialed. The call was quickly connected. Michelle Simmons was surprised to hear Eric's voice, but she still asked, "Mr. Williams, I've already sent the information over. Have you seen it?" "Yes." Eric looked at the 2 pieces of information on the round table in front of him and said, "Kate Beckinsale and Penelope Cruz. These 2 actresses. Is there any other information about them other than the information I have?" Michelle Simmons paused for a moment, as if she was looking for something. She quickly said, "Most of the information about them has been sent over. Penelope Cruz's resume is very complete. She made her debut in Biggs Luna's Ham last year. Ham won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival last year. Penelope Cruz's performance also won the recognition of many judges. As for Kate Beckinsale, although she only had a few cameo roles, she participated in a strong cast of Shakespeare's comedy Much Ado About Nothing last year. The movie will be released next month." The male and female leads are Kenneth Branagh, who won the Oscar for Best Actor 3 years ago, and Emma Thompson, who won the Oscar for Best Actress this year. In addition, the popular Michael Keaton, Keanu Reeves, and others also participated. The production company is aiming for next year's Oscar for Best Actor, so the production should be very good. To be able to participate in such a movie, this girl must be quite capable. I also had an audition for her when I was in England. Chapter 523. Eric also remembered some information about Much Ado About Nothing. Since this movie was aiming for the Oscars, it seemed that the first movie had gone the wrong way. He wondered who came up with the idea of releasing it in May. If it was released now and did not cause too much of an impact, then the popularity of the movie during the annual award season should have dissipated. Eric guessed that the production company wanted to take advantage of the hot summer season to recover some of the box office. However, he did not think of any connection between this movie and the Oscars. He guessed that the movie did not make a splash in the box office and did not win any awards. However, these were not Eric's concerns. After Michelle Simmons finished speaking, Eric stood up and thought for a moment. He said, "How about this? I will send you some screenplays later. You can let the 2 of them record some auditions and send the videotapes to me." Although Michelle Simmons realized that Eric thought highly of the 2 actresses, she still asked, "Mr. Williams, I brought back a total of 8 girls. I think that maybe they can all participate in an audition." When Eric heard Michelle Simmons' hesitant tone, he immediately realized her difficulties. The girls that Michelle Simmons brought back must have been entrusted to her by acquaintances in the film industry in Europe. If they came all the way to Los Angeles and did not even participate in an audition, then Michelle Simmons would be in a difficult position. Okay, let them all participate in the audition. Mr. Williams, maybe I can bring them to New York and you can see for yourself? Michelle Simmons made another suggestion. Eric was stunned and smiled. Michelle, you should know about my recent situation. It's not convenient for me to show up. You can handle this. Also, you can find Drew to arrange the audition. She will be in charge of the production of Whimsical Beauty in the future. You can get familiar with her in advance. Okay, I got it. Michelle Simmons did not say anything more. After chatting for a while, she hung up. 2 days later, a group of girls' audition tapes were sent to Eric. Eric spent a few hours watching the tapes, but he didn't see any talented girls with amazing acting skills. He then sent his original decision to Michelle Simmons, who was far away in Los Angeles. After that, through John Woo's introduction, Firefly found the martial arts instructor of the Yuan family troupe from the other side of the ocean, who was responsible for training the 3 women. Time always flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was late May. All the summer movies had entered the final promotional period. Although the main promotional force of Jurassic Park was the actors in the movie, it was too much for the director, Eric, to not attend any events during the whole promotional process. At least, that was what Jeffrey and the others thought. In a phone call, Jerry Bruckheimer complained that Eric should have attended most of the promotional events. He also jokingly asked Eric to give him a raise. For 2 months, Eric basically only contacted the outside world through phone calls and emails. He even rarely went out. People often came to visit, but everyone knew Eric's scruples. They were very careful when they came to visit. Besides, the original small manor was empty. The paparazzi all thought that Eric had left Chongdao with the women. Therefore, Eric's residence was never photographed by the paparazzi. However, as the release date of Jurassic Park was getting closer and closer, Eric had to rush back to Los Angeles to preside over the final stage of the movie's promotion. Moreover, it was impossible for Eric, the director, to miss the movie's premiere. Peter Guber got out of the car and walked all the way into the headquarters of Firefly Pictures with his assistant. After the front desk announced his arrival, he quickly walked into the elevator and went all the way to Eric's office on the top floor. After greeting the assistant outside Eric's office, he knocked on the door and pushed open the door of Eric's office. Seeing the young man sitting behind the desk, Peter Guber walked over with a smile as if he had seen his own family. Eric, you are finally back. Eric smiled at Peter Guber and hurriedly said a few words on the phone. Then he got up and said with a smile, Peter, I have heard what you just said more than 100 times in the past 2 days. Haha, that shows how much everyone misses you. By the way, have you received my gifts for the little guys? Peter Guber hugged Eric and asked. Of course, thank you. They like it very much. Let's sit over there. Eric pointed to the guest sofa and pressed the phone to ask the secretary to help make coffee. Then, he sat down on the sofa with Peter Guber. After the secretary served the coffee and left the office, Peter Guber couldn't wait to say, Eric, the global release of Mr. and Mrs. Smith is about to end. We really can't wait any longer. When you left, you told me that you would consider our next few movie projects. Of course, Peter, I have always kept this matter in mind. Eric picked up the coffee, blew it gently, and said, Don't worry, try the coffee first. Peter Guber had already lost his temper because of Eric's delay. He could only pick up the coffee and pretend to take a few sips. Soon, he put down the coffee cup again. Eric, I heard that you are now preparing the movie version of Charlie's Angel. If you don't have any other projects for the time being, I think this movie is fine. You know, we still have a contract for 4 movies, but there are less than 2 years left. When Eric heard Peter Guber say this, he put down the coffee cup and said, Peter, Charlie's Angel definitely won't work. I have other plans for this movie. Peter Guber was just testing the waters. When he saw that Eric didn't agree, he said, Then, How about getting Wu to prepare the sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith immediately? We can't do nothing, right? Don't worry, Peter. Wait a moment, Eric said. He got up and took out a folder from the filing cabinet. He walked over and handed it to him. I said that I would keep this matter in mind. Look, I have already found the project. Peter Goober saw that things had finally taken shape. He couldn't wait to open the folder that Eric handed over. Game of the Brave, what genre is this? Peter Goober asked as he flipped through the information. After just a few pages, he didn't know what to say. This is a 1981 children's literature work. Why didn't I know that there was such a work in Columbia's copyright library? When Eric heard Peter Goober say this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. This guy was thinking about getting benefits from Columbia all day long. He didn't have time to pay attention to this kind of thing. Game of the Brave was a 1981 work by the famous American children's literature writer, Chris Osberg. It was about a magical board game similar to Monopoly. This board could summon various characters and animals from another time and space, which led to a series of magical stories. A few years after the novel was released, Columbia Pictures bought the movie adaptation rights. However, because the movie needed a lot of special effects, and Columbia Pictures' business was not very good at that time. In addition, the special effects technology was very immature. The management dared not risk spending a lot of money to make such a movie, so the copyright had been shelved. When Peter Goober urged Eric more than 2 months ago, Eric asked for their copyright reserves from Columbia, so he found the adaptation rights of this novel. Together with Game of the Brave, he found the adaptation rights of another comic. Looking at Peter Goober flipping through slowly, Eric said directly, "Peter, this is just the first project. There is another one below." Another one? Peter Goober flipped down in surprise and soon found the name of another movie. Man in Black. I seem to have heard of this. This is a comic 2 years ago. I didn't expect. At this point, Peter Goober's expression finally showed a trace of embarrassment. I didn't expect that the copyright of this comic is also with Columbia. Eric didn't urge Peter Goober this time. He let the other party read the information slowly and said, "Peter, according to the agreement we signed, the copyright of the 5 movies is shared by both parties. So if you want to make 2 projects, you need to sign a copyright sharing agreement in advance." Peter Goober was stunned. The adaptation rights of these 2 works were solely owned by Columbia Pictures. According to the original agreement, the copyright would become Fireflies in the blink of an eye. And if there were no sequels in a few years, Columbia's copyright would even automatically return to Firefly. No matter how he thought about it, he was at a disadvantage. This made Peter Goober very unhappy. Looking up at Eric, who picked up the coffee again and drank it slowly, Peter Goober had the idea of ignoring Firefly and making these 2 movies alone. However, this idea only flashed in his mind. Soon, Peter Goober was a little discouraged. In the information he just saw, these 2 movies were projects with special effects taking a large proportion. One was full of monsters and beasts running rampant everywhere, and the other was full of aliens. If he ignored Firefly, then the digital domain was likely not to participate in the special effects production of these 2 movies. It was not so easy to find a special effects company with enough technical strength to make these 2 movies in Hollywood. Even Industrial Light and Magic, which was outstanding a few years ago, might not be able to play. In the past 2 years, everyone in Hollywood knew that because of the rise of the digital domain, Industrial Light and Magic had begun to decline. Especially in the field of computer CG, Industrial Light and Magic was left behind by the digital domain by a few streets. Moreover, if he got rid of Firefly, Eric would definitely not give any guidance to these 2 projects. Then, it was not certain whether they would succeed or not. Cutthroat Island's box office failure, which was recorded in the Guinness World Records, was still a topic that many people in Hollywood were talking about. Although Eric pretended to be indifferent, he had been paying attention to the changes in Peter Goober's expression from the corner of his eye. Seeing Peter Goober's expression gradually relaxed, Eric said at the right time, "Peter, the copyright of Mr. and Mrs. Smith could have been owned by Firefly alone, but I still did not hesitate to take it out. Furthermore, if you can give Sony HQ a good financial report like last quarter, your position will be more stable. I believe Sony HQ will not be bothered by these small details. Feng Yu said. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Peter Guber knew that Columbia would definitely suffer this loss. However, when he heard Eric's words, Peter Guber also reacted. Anyway, these losses would eventually fall on the Japanese. When he was hired, Sony's headquarters set up a reward fund with a total amount of $50 million. Because of the excellent results of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Sony's headquarters redeemed a part of the reward. As long as the next movie could still achieve good results, then in the next few years, Peter Guber could continue to redeem these rewards. In addition, he had secretly reaped a lot of benefits from Columbia. Even if he left Columbia in a few years, he could almost rely on these savings to retire early and enjoy his life. As for what would happen to Columbia, it had nothing to do with him. Okay, Eric, I will arrange for someone to discuss the relevant contract as soon as possible. However, it is already the end of May. According to the fastest production progress, these two movies should be released in the summer next year. In that case, we will not have any movies to cooperate with this year. Eric saw that the copyrights of Game of the Brave and Men in Black were in his hands, and he knew that he should return the favor. He said quickly, in that case, let John Woo make another gunfight movie. I will personally take care of this. You know, Hong Kong directors have always been very fast in producing movies. Coupled with the non-special effects film, there should be no problem releasing it at the end of the year. Eric happened to remember John Woo's most successful movies in Hollywood. Hearing Eric say this, Peter Guber grinned and said, since the 3 movies have been confirmed, Eric, why don't you take this opportunity to finalize the last movie as well? Firefly has so many incubating projects. It's not a big deal to give up one. Also, if all 4 movies are confirmed, then I can immediately announce it to the public. This can also give investors some confidence. Eric didn't think of a suitable movie for a while. The projects in the Firefly project couldn't be easily given to Columbia. After thinking about it, Eric said, in that case, you might as well announce it directly to the public and add a sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Anyway, the other 3 movies are real. When the time comes, you can say that the plan for the sequel failed for various reasons. The public won't suspect anything. Good idea. Peter Guber clapped his hands. But Eric, why don't you just make a sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Okay, but I don't have time to think about the script for the sequel, so I have to find another screenwriter and try to write the script for the sequel. If the script can satisfy me, I will start the production of the sequel. Chapter 524. Eric was pestered by Peter Guber for nearly an hour. If it weren't for the important meeting he had to attend, Eric estimated that he would have been consumed by this guy the whole morning. After sending Peter Guber away, Eric quickly came to the big conference room at Firefly's headquarters. At this time, almost all the executives of Firefly Pictures had arrived. Even many of the executives of the overseas branch had rushed back. There were a total of 40 to 50 people. Because the summer vacation was coming in June, as a film and entertainment company, the departments of Firefly would also usher in the busiest period. In order not to delay work, the management arranged the operation and financial summary meeting for the first half of the year at the end of May. Firefly was not a listed company, so there was no need to wait for the official financial report for the first half of the year to be released and then conduct business summary and adjustment according to the requirements of the board of directors. In the first half of the year, the film market in North America did not perform well. Only Paramount Pictures' Sex Deal, released during the Easter holiday, was lucky enough to get a box office of more than $100 million. In the first 6 months of 1993, Firefly released a total of 7 low-budget movies. The best box office performance was a family adventure comedy called Cat and Dog Games, which was produced by Disney and distributed by Bowie International. It earned more than $43 million at the box office in North America. The total box office of the 7 movies in North America was only $180 million. This number seemed a bit insignificant, but Firefly's total turnover in the first half of the year from sales of videotapes peripheral copyright operations, theme parks, Disney stores, and other businesses reached $2 billion. The pre-tax profit was also more than $250 million. In this way, the revenue from the box office only accounted for about 10% of the total turnover of Firefly Pictures. Eric was very clear that if this revenue ratio was really reached, it would be the healthiest business structure for a comprehensive development media group. This would also allow a media company to have the strongest ability to resist risks and not fall into the predicament of bankruptcy because of the failure of one or two movies. However, in fact, Firefly was far from reaching this point. The reason for this temporary revenue ratio was mainly because most of the first half of the year was in the off-season. The most popular summer and New Year's movies were concentrated in the last 6 months of the year, and Firefly's main movies were also released in the last 6 months. The total production cost of the 3 movies, Jurassic Park, Crash, and The Bug Crisis, during the summer was more than the total production and distribution cost of the 7 movies in the first half of the year. The whole meeting didn't end until 4:30 in the afternoon. Although there was still half an hour before work, Eric had already planned to go home early. However, as soon as he packed up his things, he was stopped by Katzenberg. Behind him was Patrick Schneider, the head of Disneyland Paris. Because of the major mistakes in the management of Disneyland Paris last year, Eric and Katzenberg originally planned to withdraw Patrick Schneider back to the headquarters, but then the management of Disneyland Paris showed good improvements under Patrick Schneider's management. After discussing with Katzenberg, Eric decided to let Patrick Schneider stay for the time being. Today's meeting also talked about the situation of Disneyland Paris. In the first 2 quarters, the total number of visitors to Disneyland Paris reached 6 million, and the operation had reached a break-even. It might even achieve a certain profit in the second half of the year. As a project that was seriously out of control during the development process, Eric's requirement for Disneyland Paris was to be able to maintain a break-even and not become a burden to the group. Being able to achieve a profit already made Eric overjoyed. After all, after the opening of Disneyland Paris in the original space-time, it basically brought hundreds of millions of dollars of losses to Disney's headquarters every year. There were very few profitable years. Eric, this is the case. Louis Bartlot, the representative of the French investors of Disneyland Paris, also came to Los Angeles. The French are not very satisfied with the current situation of Disneyland Paris. They hope to take back the management rights of Disneyland Paris. Katzenberg had never been a long-winded person, and he was not used to beating around the bush. In a few words, he explained the reason why he stopped Eric. Eric did not take the 2 back to his office. He motioned for them to sit down at the conference table and asked, "I remember that we told them the situation of Disneyland Paris very clearly last year. We also made a lot of changes. Isn't the situation developing in a good way now? Why do they still have this idea?" Patrick Schneider, who was sitting on the other side, had the most detailed understanding of the inside story. He said, "Mr. Williams, the situation of Disneyland Paris is indeed developing in a good way, but compared with the profitability of Tokyo Disneyland, the gap is too big. The reason why the French have this idea should be because they are affected by the Japanese running Tokyo Disneyland." Eric sneered in his heart. The French have a good plan, but they don't consider whether they have the ability to do so. The success of Tokyo Disneyland mainly lies in the Japanese's recognition and worship of American culture. These conditions do not exist in Europe. He remembered that in the original space-time, because of the huge losses in the early stages of Disneyland Paris, Disney's headquarters was forced to give up the control of the park. As a result, Disneyland Paris did not change for more than 10 years in the hands of the French. Instead, it became more and more a burden to Disney. Based on this alone, Eric could not give up the control of Disneyland Paris. After all, Disney's headquarters had a wealth of operating experience. This was also the reason why Disneyland in Paris was able to quickly adjust and gradually improve in less than a year after the problem was discovered. If it was handed over to the French, who knew what these people would do to the park? In any case, we will definitely not give up the control of Disneyland Paris, Eric said. He looked at the 2 and asked, "Is it Louis Bartlot who wants to see me? He invited us to a cocktail party tonight to talk about this matter. The 2 of us have already agreed." After all, you are a guest from afar. We just wanted to tell you and discuss how to deal with it, Carson said. He obviously knew that Eric would not attend this so-called cocktail party. I won't go, Eric shook his head, thought for a while, and said, aren't the French jealous of Tokyo Disneyland? Since they want to take back the control, it is not impossible. Before Eric could finish, Carson hurriedly said, Eric, absolutely not. Eric stopped Carson's words and said with a smile, wait for me to finish. You know that I was pestered by Peter Guber some time ago. If we refuse, I think we will definitely be pestered by the French in the future. So, let's just give them the price. Since they want to get the same control as the Japanese, then just like the Japanese, they can buy back all the shares of Disneyland in Paris. We can be like Tokyo Disneyland, and only charge a patent licensing fee. Hearing Eric's words, Katzenberg was relieved. Patrick Schneider also smiled and said, that's a good idea. If the French are willing to buy the shares in our hands, then the headquarters can get rid of this big burden, and we can continue to earn profits from Disneyland in Paris without suffering any losses. In the future, even if Disneyland Paris can't survive in the hands of the French, we don't need to take too much responsibility. Although the situation of Disneyland Paris had improved, as the person in charge, Patrick Schneider didn't feel relaxed at all. Most of the time, he was worried that the situation of the park would suddenly worsen. If he could get rid of this burden and return to the headquarters, he would be more than happy to do so. However, he also knew that this was unlikely. The French would not be stupid enough to take all the risks. Therefore, Eric's condition was basically equivalent to cutting off the French's idea of taking back Disneyland Paris. Carson also said at this time, in that case, Eric, maybe you can come to the banquet tonight. Wouldn't it be better for you to personally tell Louis Bartlow about this condition? I'm looking forward to his expression when he hears this condition. Eric shook his head and said, forget it. It's not necessary. In addition, Jeffrey, although you have this condition as a shield, I think you can definitely explain the pros and cons to him clearly with your eloquence. There's no need to let the French think about this all the time. Okay, I got it. Carson nodded. After talking about this matter, the three of them left the conference room together. As they walked towards the elevator, Patrick Schneider suddenly said, Mr. Williams, I heard that the company is recently planning to open a new artistic film production department dedicated to producing award-winning films, right? Eric nodded and said with a smile, Michael is now in charge of the planning of this department. You don't want to recommend yourself to be the person in charge, do you? There were too many people named Michael, but Patrick Schneider still knew that the Michael that Eric mentioned was the CEO of Firefly, Michael Lin. Of course not, Mr. Williams. However, I have been staying in France and have a good relationship with the film and television industry there. Recently, a very good young French director is planning to come to Hollywood. Although he is only in his early 30s, he has already been nominated for several César Awards. Speaking of which, this guy's first film was nominated for a César Award at the age of 25. This is very rare in the French film industry. Everyone knows that in the conservative film industry of France, it is 100 times more difficult for young people to make a name for themselves than in Hollywood. What's even rarer is that this director's work is both commercial and artistic. The three of them walked into the elevator together. Then Katzenberg said, it is not so easy for a French director to get the recognition of an Oscar, unless they have made their debut in Hollywood. Patrick Schneider was just asked by someone to mention this to Eric. He also knew that Katzenberg was telling the truth. When he was about to agree, he heard Eric ask, what is the name of this director? Luc Besson, Patrick Schneider replied. Eric thought that it was indeed this guy. He smiled and said, what a coincidence. I just saw his film, Nikita. It was not bad. If White Dove Wu's 3 axes in Hollywood were slow motion, close-ups, and doves, then Eric's impression of Luc Besson's 3 axes was to chase, kill, and kill. This was not to say that Luc Besson's film style was monotonous. It was just that in the works of Luc Besson that Eric had seen, there were too many chase and kill plots. From the early Nikita to the later Hurricane Rescue, and the somewhat inexplicable box office success of Supernatural, etc., they could not avoid this kind of plot. And the audience was also very attracted to this kind of simple and crude plot that stimulated adrenaline. Thinking of this, Eric asked, "Pat, you said that Luc Besson is going to Hollywood. What's going on?" Patrick Schneider replied, "He plans to make a movie with a killer theme. He plans to shoot it in New York, so he is looking for a collaborator here." Eric thought that a movie about a killer in New York had to be Leon the Assassin. Leon the Assassin. How about this? Let the production department contact him. I will read the script first. If possible, Firefly can be responsible for the investment and production. Patrick Schneider did not expect Eric to make such a decision on the spot. He nodded and said, "No problem. He is also in Los Angeles recently. I will contact him tonight." After exiting the elevator, the three of them said goodbye to each other and got into their respective cars. The chauffeur drove the car onto the road. Eric looked out of the window in a daze. The trajectory of the world had changed so much under his influence. Although the director was still the same director and the male lead should be the same male lead, he did not know if Lorita was still the same Lorita. The car passed by a cinema. Eric caught a glimpse of the 2-meter-tall Jurassic Park poster hanging on the wall outside the cinema. Only then did he collect his thoughts. Jurassic Park was going to be released soon. This was the most important thing now. The initial investment of $25 million for publicity had been completed. Eric did not hesitate to ask for another $25 million. Furthermore, with the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, as an example, Eric did not hesitate this time. He insisted on raising $3,000 for the release of Jurassic Park. There was no doubt that Jurassic Park would be the first movie in North America to raise more than $3,000 for its release. Now, Jurassic Park had entered its final pre-release period. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.